Dolan Reeve has been awake for 9 hours with his chest under a slab of gallery stone, and that is not going to change because I deleted the rule that would have let him stop. I did it on purpose. There was a button. The whole thing took about 4 seconds. He was a bench hand on the second terrace, and I knew him the way you know a man whose lunch tin you have been stepping over for 2 years. He is still down there. He is still saying words. That belongs in front of everything else, before the part where I looked clever, because the order matters. First I broke it. Then I spent a year learning what I had broken. That morning, I was 80 feet up the face of the drywall upper gallery, with a rope under my arms and a tin of chalk in my teeth, setting anchors for a lift that Bram Cole had already told me twice he did not like. I am a rigger's apprentice. That is the whole of what I am. I set anchors, I read loads, and I decide how much weight a line takes before it stops being a line and becomes a falling thing with people under it. The upper gallery was overcut. I knew it the way you know a bad tooth. The face had been worked back too far under the shelf, and the shelf was carrying about 200 stone of nothing holding it. Mira Selve had written that down. She keeps the tallies and runs the survey chain, and 3 weeks earlier she had filed that the gallery was cut past its bench line by 12 feet. The office read her numbers against the load records, and the load records said the shelf was rated, and a rated shelf beats a clerk with a chain. She was overruled in writing by a page that was wrong. She had shown me the filing. She did not complain about it. She said, "The shelf will come down in autumn, and I would like it on paper that I said so first," and then she went back to counting. Kettle Vance had a charge already in. Powder man, 40 years of it, and the most cautious human being in the county. He had bored and packed the relief cut 2 days before, and had been waiting on a sequence from Bram ever since. He came up the ledge road that morning to ask for the 4th time when he could shoot it. Bram told him after the lift. Kettle said the lift is on the shelf, and the shelf is the thing I'm supposed to be relieving. Bram said he would sequence it properly or not at all, and Kettle went away furious and correct, which is the state I have seen him in more than any other. So that was the shift. 41 men, 1 overcut shelf, 1 charge nobody was allowed to fire, 1 clerk who had been right in writing, and me on a rope over all of it with chalk in my teeth. At about the 8th hour, the world made an announcement. It did not come from anywhere. There was no light and no sound. It simply arrived in front of my eyes at a comfortable reading distance, in plain gray letters, and it did not move when I moved my head. The text said the index had been installed across the region and thanked us for our patience during setup. It said a public tier window had been issued to every eligible party. It said 1 editor seat had been assigned. It did not say to whom. Then the whole quarry started shouting at the same time, which is a thing I had never heard before and have not heard since, and I nearly came off the face. My boot went off the ledge lip, and the line took me hard across the ribs and swung me into the rock, and I hung there with my mouth full of chalk and blood, while 40 men read their fortunes out loud. Everyone had a window. Everyone got a class, a level, a list of quests, and 1 small showy gift. And within about a minute, everyone was lying about it. Bram had foreman, level 1, and a boon that let him know when a rope was fraying. He said that one out loud and then said it was the stupidest thing he had ever been given, since he had known that for 26 years without help. Nim got small and quick, which is not a joke. That is what it said, and a boon for holding her breath. She is 11. She was delighted. She spent the next hour proving it in the water butt. Kettle got Powder Master and a quest to demolish a structure. He read it twice, looked at the shelf, and went very still, because he was the only man in Draywall who understood what the index had just told 40 excited people to go and do. Mine was gray and it had no border. Everyone else's window had a colored border, and a little wheel that turned while it thought. Mine was the color of dishwater. It had no tutorial, and it had 1 line of text with 2 spelling errors in it. Editor tier, access granted, welcome. Your seat is provisional pending nothing. Under that, there was a field for typing in, and under the field, there was a single button, and beside the button was a count. It said delete rule, 1 of 1. Under everything, in the smallest type, there was a number that I later learned every window in the world was showing that day. Known issues. 0. I did not tell anybody, and there was no cleverness in that. I did not understand what I was looking at. And because a 19-year-old apprentice who announces he has the only one of something gets laughed off a ledge, I put it away and got back on the line, and that is when the quarry stopped working. Not gradually, all at once, the way a shift stops when the bell goes. 40 men climbed off their benches to find out what their new boons did, and the place to find out was the ledges, because the ledges are where the drop is. A stone splitter named Arrow jumped from the 3rd terrace to the 2nd on the strength of a level 1 balance boon and landed well, and after that, it was a competition. Bram was screaming at them from the crane deck to get off the shelf. He was right. Nobody was listening. And this is the part I would like understood, because it was not stupidity, it was the first hour of a miracle. Kettle was screaming too, from further up, that there was live powder under their feet, and a bench line 12 feet past where it should be. Mira came out of the tally shed with her board under her arm to count how many were on the shelf, because that is what she does. And she was standing at the bench line writing down names when it went. There is no noise first. Everybody gets that wrong. The shelf drops about a hand's width and stops, and in that half second the whole face goes quiet, and then it comes. I was on the rope with 2 anchors set into the shelf itself, which is to say I was tied to the thing that was falling. I got my knife into the line and cut myself free and dropped 12 feet onto the terrace below, with the face coming down behind me. I came up under a dust that you could not breathe. I could hear the crane deck bell and somebody screaming a name that was not mine, and the long grinding settle of about 400 tons of drywall finding a new place to sit. When it cleared enough to see, the upper gallery was gone, and the 2nd terrace was a slope of broken bench stone, and there were people in it. I found Mira by her board. It was standing upright out of the rubble like a marker, and she was under the edge of a slab the size of a cart with her legs and her hips in the dark part of it. She was awake. She looked at me and said, "Count it." Because she knows what I do, and she wanted the number before she wanted comfort. So I counted it. The slab was bearing on her at about the hip and lying at an angle onto a broken bench below her, and the angle meant it was still moving. There was blood coming out from under her at a rate that had a shape to it. I have priced falls and loads since I was 14. I gave her 9 minutes. I gave the slab a 4-man pull and a purchase we did not have, and 40 minutes to rig, which is a way of saying I gave her nothing. She said, "Do not lie to me," and I said, 9 minutes. And she said, "All right," and then she said, "Get Nim out of the vent first." She went in on the west side. It is the last thing she said as a person who could feel her own legs. I do not remember making the decision. I remember my hands being wrong on the window, and I remember that it did not ask me twice. I typed what I wanted removed. I typed it the way I would name a failure in the daybook, with the fault and the name of the thing it was happening to, because that is how you write a fault, so a stranger can find it. So I typed, "The stopping of Mira Self." That is what I wrote. It was specific, it was true, and it was about a woman with 9 minutes in her, and I have gone over it every week since, and I would write it the same way again. The index did not execute what I wrote. It matched it. Input accepted. Nearest index entry matched. Cessation. The ending of awareness in a creature that breathes air. Removing. It did not ask. It did not show me the match before it took it. It threw away the half of my sentence that had her name in it, and kept the half it recognized, and it did that in less time than it takes to blink. Rule removed. Thank you for using the editor. Your seat is now read only. Please rate your experience. Nothing happened. That is the part I was not ready for. No light, no sound, no shift in the dust. The count beside the button had gone from 1 of 1 to 0 of 1, and the number at the bottom of the window had gone from 0 to 1, and everything else in the world looked exactly the same. Then Mira Selv opened her eyes. I have to be honest about the next 90 seconds, because they were the best of my life, and I was wrong about all of them. I thought I had bought her. I thought whatever that thing was, it had cost me a button, and it had bought her. I got a bar under the slab edge, and Bram got 4 men on it, and we took the weight off her hip, and she was talking all through it, and the blood was still coming, and she did not stop. She should have stopped. I had already priced it. She was 6 minutes past my own number, and she was correcting Bram's count of who had been on the shelf. Then Bram said my name in a voice I had not heard from him, and I looked where he was looking. Dolan Reeve was about 12 feet away with a slab across his chest from the collarbone down. There was no part of that a man walks away from. His ribs were not where ribs are. He was asking us to get it off him. He was not dying. He was not going anywhere. He was lying under about a ton of drywall with his chest opened and his lungs finished. And he was awake. And he was asking, politely at first, for us to get it off him. Bram went to him, and I saw the exact second Bram understood, because he stopped moving his hands. Then somebody up the hill started shouting about Peth Dow. Peth is the bellman. When the shelf went, he had run for the tower and gone up the ladder too fast, and come off the top platform onto the flagstones, 60 feet, flat. They had already put a coat over him. He pushed it off. His legs were folded the wrong way under him and one arm was in 3 places, and he was up on his elbows in a spreading dark patch, asking whether anybody had rung the bell. Nobody answered him. A man came out of the crowd and rang it, badly, 5 times, and Peth lay back down and said thank you. There was a dog. The quarry keeps one. A black thing with a bad ear that lives under the weighhouse. A bench stone had come down across its back on the terrace slope. It could not move its hind end. It was dragging itself in a circle by its front legs, and it had been doing that for some time. And it went on doing it, while men stood around it and nobody would be the one to fetch the hammer. That was when I understood. And I did not say anything. And I have to be exact about this, because it is the worst thing I did that day, and it is not the deletion. I understood at the dog. I stood in a crowd of 40 people who were all working out that nobody had died, and I knew why, and I closed my mouth and helped with the digging. We got 7 of them out before dark. Mira, Dolan Reeve, a pair of brothers off the number 3 bench, a girl who had been fetching water, Peth from the flagstones, and a man whose name I got wrong for a month because nobody could ask him. Nim went into the west vent 4 times. She fits where we do not. She came out the 4th time towing a hand by the wrist, and the hand was gripping back, and she was so pleased with herself that she cried. Bram sequenced the dig properly in the end, because Bram sequences things, and I have never been more grateful for a man refusing to hurry. He put shoring in before he put men in, and it held. Kettle Vance stood at the bottom of the ledge road for 2 hours, while people who had never fired a charge in their lives explained to each other that his powder had done it. His powder had not done it. His charge was still in the hole, unfired, and I told them so, and Mira had told them so in writing 3 weeks earlier, and neither of those things weighed anything against 40 frightened people needing a reason. He said one thing to me. At the end of it, he said, "They will want me to blast something eventually, and when they do, I am going to want the plan in my hand first, and I will not be hurried. Write that down somewhere." The physicians came out of the town at dusk and told us what we already had in front of us. Mira's spine was broken low and both her legs were finished, and there was an abdominal wound that would not close. Not would not close quickly, would not close. There was nothing left in there to pull the edges together with, and every hour it stayed open was an hour she was awake for. She was awake for all of it. She lay on a plank in the weighhouse and had somebody hold her board up so she could see it, and she asked for the shift list, and she went down it, and she got the count of who was still under right on the first try. Somebody brought her water, and she said, "Thank you." And then she said, "I would like an explanation for why I am doing arithmetic instead of being dead, because on the numbers, I should have gone at about 4 o'clock. Nobody explained. I was standing close enough to touch her board. By full dark, the town had made up its mind, and it had made it up the happy way. 41 men on a collapsed gallery, and not one funeral. That is what they were saying at the gate. Not one funeral. A man I did not know stood on the wall of the ore yard and cut his own hand open with a knife to show the crowd, and the crowd cheered, and the cut stayed open and bled down his sleeve for the rest of the night. I went out to the water butt to wash, and there was a woman there gutting the day's fish for the supper pot, and the fish were dead, ordinary, stiff, exactly as fish are. I noticed that, and could not do anything with it. I put my hands in the water, looked at a dead fish, and went back inside. My window was still there when I closed my eyes. It said, "Delete rule, 0 of 1. Under it, in the small type, known issues, 1. And under that, new since the afternoon, a line I would come to know better than my own name. We are aware of reduced service in some areas. Thank you for your patience." The trouble was arriving in a shape nobody in that weighhouse had thought of yet, and it was not grief. Draywell had 7 people who were not going to get better and were not going to finish, and it had 1 fish seller. Ice is a summer luxury in a quarry town. We had what the fishmonger kept for the market and what the burial guild kept for the hot months, and that was all of it. And by midnight, both were open and both were going down. Cold is the only thing that slows a wound. Cold and being asleep. We had a bit of one and none of the other, and there were 7 of them, and Dolan Reeve had started asking for his mother. Somewhere after midnight, a horse came up the ledge road too fast for the ledge road, which is how Orlovec arrives anywhere. She is 17, and she rides for the relay, and she had come up from the county town with a satchel of nothing useful, and her face full of it. She got down, looked at the lamps in the weighhouse, and asked what had happened here, Bram told her. Then he asked what had happened out there, because a courier is the only news anybody in Draywall was going to get for 2 days. She said the gray letters had come at the same hour everywhere. She had passed a hanging at Call Bridge on her way through. A proper crown execution with a magistrate present and a rope and a drop. She said the drop had worked as a drop works, and the man had gone down, and the rope had gone tight, and then he had hung there for 2 hours, and he was hanging there when she rode out. She said he was still talking. By the third day, Drewall had 2 towns in it, and they were about 400 yards apart. Up at the ore yard, there was a festival. Down at the Burial Guild Hall, there were 7 people on the floor who could not be helped and could not be finished, and the door was propped open because of the smell. Outside, a cooper's boy went off the market roof onto the cobbles for money. He landed on his shoulder, got up with the shoulder in the wrong place, took the coin with his good hand, and went round to climb it again. That is what the first week was. Everybody in the county found out at the same time that they could not be killed, and about 1 person in 20 decided the correct response was to test it in public. Tovin Ash owned the guild hall. He is in his 60s. He has buried 3 counties worth of people, and on the day the index came, he became a man with a trade that had no object left in it. He did not stand around about it. By the second morning, he had the hall cleared, the trestles out, the flagstones washed, and every one of the 7 under his own roof, because nobody else in Drewall would take them. He said the thing I keep coming back to. He said, "I have spent 40 years learning how to move a broken body without adding to it, and that turns out to be a skill with a future." The trouble was that he had no method, and neither did anybody else. He had ice, boards, rope, straw, and 14 men who knew how to carry. He did not have an answer, because there was not one, and he said so on the second day. They tried the obvious things first, and the obvious things belong on the record, because a lot of what happened later is people refusing to learn what that week taught. They tried water. A miller's cousin held Dolan Reeves' own brother under the trough for 6 minutes on the brother's asking, and let him up, and the brother coughed and thanked him, and was exactly as he had been. They tried cold on its own, which does work, but only as far as it goes. They tried opium, which works better, and which ran out in a day and a half, because Drewall's whole supply was 4 ounces in an apothecary's drawer. They tried the thing everybody tries, which is prayer. And then they tried the thing nobody says out loud. And then Widow Sarn went to the Executioner's Guild. Her son is Cor Sarn. He was on the number 3 bench, and he came out of the rubble with his jaw and the whole left side of his face gone, and no way to make a word, which is why I had his name wrong for a month. She did not go for Cor. She went for Dolan Reeve because Dolan had been asking for a day and a half, out loud in front of everybody, and because she is the kind of woman who does the thing the town needs and lets the town resent her for it. Master Ubrill came down that afternoon with 2 of his men and his case. Executioner's Guild, 31 years, and I had never seen him before, because you do not see that man socially. He was very polite about it. He asked Tovin's permission to enter the hall, and he asked Dolan directly, twice, in front of a dozen witnesses. And Dolan said yes, both times, and thanked him. Then Ubrill did his work, which he is good at, and which he did correctly, and it did not take. He did it again with a different method. It did not take. He stood up after the second one, and his hands were shaking, which I do not think anybody in that hall had ever expected to see. And he said, "I cannot do this. Not I will not. I cannot." Dolan Reeves said it was all right, and told him not to feel bad about it. And that is the moment the room understood the size of the thing, because the man on the floor was comforting the man who had come to release him. Ubrill packed his case and walked out and sat on the mounting block outside for about an hour. Tovin went and sat next to him, and did not say anything for most of it. What he eventually said was, "I have got 7 of them and 14 men, and no idea what I am doing, and you have got 40 trained hands and nothing to put them on." Ubrill said, "That is the first sensible sentence anyone has said to me this week." That is how those 2 started. They have not stopped arguing since, and they have not been more than a day apart since either. Dr. Ilsa Ran arrived at the guild hall on the 3rd afternoon, on foot, off the county road, with a bag and no escort, because she had heard the same rumor as everybody else, and had decided to go and measure it. She is somewhere in her late 30s. She talks in a clipped way that makes people think she is angry when she is only being efficient. And she is the best field physician in Cairnvered. She had the whole mechanic inside 5 hours. Nobody helped her. That needs stating plainly, because it matters later. She did it with her own eyes and her own notebook, from what was in front of her, while the rest of us were still arguing about miracles. She went down the row and examined all 7 and wrote for a long time. Then she went out to the terrace slope with a lamp and found the dog, and knelt beside it with her fingers on its ribs for about 10 minutes. Then she went to the water butt, and to the fish cellar, and to a horse with a broken cannon bone in the carrier's yard. And then she came back and stood in the middle of the guild hall and said it out loud. She said, "Nothing ends. That is all of it. Nothing that breathes air loses awareness permanently, by any means, including the means we have tried." She said, "And nothing else has changed. Do not let anybody tell you otherwise. Wounds are as bad as they ever were. Nothing is healing faster. Bone is not knitting. blood still leaves. She said, the small things still end. The fish in that cellar are dead. There are flies on the terrace and they are dying on schedule. Whatever this is, it did not reach anything that does not breathe. And then she said the sentence that put the fear into everybody who understood arithmetic, which in that hall was Mira and Tovin and me. She said, decay is unaffected. These bodies will rot as fast as bodies rot, and their owners will be present for the entire process, and cold is the only lever we have. Nobody argued. There was nothing to argue with. A carter at the back asked how long, and Ilsa said she did not know, and that she would not guess in front of the people it was about, and he shut up. Then she went straight for the opium. She did not ask. She walked to the apothecary's, took the ledger, counted the drawer, took the key, and had it inventoried and locked inside 20 minutes, before anybody in Drewall thought to have an opinion about who should hold it. Tovin objected, gently, on the grounds that it was the town's. Ilsa said, it is 4 ounces. There are 7 of them. It is going to be 4 ounces for a long time, and someone has to decide who gets it and be able to say why. He asked her who decided that it was her. She said, nobody. I am simply the only person here who can be trusted to say no. And she was not wrong, and that was the beginning of everything Ilsa Ran later became. The hold came out of Tovin's inventory, not out of anybody's idea. He walked his own storerooms with a lamp and a slate and listed what a burial guild owns, which is ice for the hot months, padded boards, straw, rope, trestles, oiled canvas, and men who can carry a body a mile without jolting it. The problem was that a broken person cannot lie on a board. Pressure on a ruined hip or a crushed chest is where all the pain is, and every hour of lying still makes a new sore that will not close either. So he slung them. Rope cradles off the trestles, the way you would sling a cask on a barge, so the weight is spread across a dozen bearing lines instead of one flat surface, with the padded boards under as backing, and the ice packed against the trunk. 7 cradles on a stone floor, fish cellar ice in oiled canvas at the hip and the shoulder, a stake at the head of each with a name chalked on a board, because Tovin will not have a person in his hall without a name on him. There is the picture. I have seen it 3 times since, at 3 sizes, and it is always the same picture from the same place, which is the doorway of that hall looking down the row, and it never gets easier. Halder Vane turned up on the 4th day and offered to help, and got laughed at and was useful within the hour. His public teardraw was a joke that the town had already heard. He can put his hands on a person and lend them warmth and endurance, and it works, and it does absolutely nothing for him. He gets no warmth back, and no rest. He said the index had given him a boon that only ever pays out to somebody else, and that he had spent a week deciding whether to be insulted, and had decided he was. In a guild hall in late summer, with 4 ounces of opium and a fish cellar going down, a man who can keep somebody warm by holding their wrist is worth more than a plow team. He worked the row that night and every night after. Now the part of it that is mine. On the 5th evening, Dolan Reeves' cradle was cutting him. The rope had bedded in over 4 days, and the bearing had crept up off his ribs to the underside of his arm, and it had opened the skin, and he had been shouting since noon. Tovin's men had rehung it twice. Rehanging a cradle with a man in it is a 4-person job, and it takes 20 minutes, and it hurts him throughout. And after the second one, the bearing crept back within an hour. I went over because I set anchors for a living, and a cradle is a rigging problem, and I put both hands on the tension line to feel where it was working, and then I did not move for a while. The window came up gray the way it had on the day, except that where the field and the button had been, there was nothing but text. And the text was not about me. It was about the rope. Cord, twisted plant fiber. Bears along its length until the fibers part in sequence. Parting begins at the outermost radius under greatest curvature, and proceeds inward. That was all of it. 1 entry, 1 layer, in the index's own words, with the index's own commas in the wrong places. No advice, no instruction, nothing about Dolan, and nothing about me. But it was enough, because it told me the failure was at the tightest bend on the outside of the curve, which is where the bearing had crept to, which meant the cradle was not slipping at all. It was walking, 1 parting fiber at a time, in a direction I could predict. So I laid it again, with the curve moved. I took the tightest bend off his ribs and put it round the trestle leg where nobody was lying, and I gave the underarm line a longer sweep so the outer radius carried nothing. 7 minutes, 2 people instead of 4. He stopped. Not gradually. He was mid-sentence, and he stopped, and then he breathed in a way he had not done in 5 days, and then he asked somebody to tell his mother he was all right, which was a lie, and it was the first lie he had been well enough to tell. Widow Sarn was standing in the doorway with a basket she had not put down. She had come to argue about Cor again. She watched Dolan Reeves stop shouting, and she stood there for a long moment with the basket still in her hands. Then she said, "All right," and went home, and came back before dark, with her son on a hurdle and 4 men to carry him, and she put him in Tovin's hall herself, and chalked his name on the board with her own hand. She said one thing to Tovin when she did it. She said, "If that rope moves on him, you send for me at any hour," and Tovin said he would, and he has, every time for a year. And then the window came back with the bill. Debit applied. In accordance with your access, 1 item has been removed from your recall. Removed? The name of the carter who brought the quarry's rope up from the cut each spring. I read it 3 times. I could not tell you now whether that is true, and that is the horror of it, because there is nothing missing from the inside. There is no gap. There is no edge to feel. I know there was a carter. I know he came in spring with rope. I know I helped him unload it more than once, and that we talked about his horse. And where the name goes, there is not a blank. There is simply nothing. The way there is nothing behind your own head. The only reason I know it was taken is that the index wrote me a receipt for it. It is the only evidence there is. A line of gray text that anybody standing next to me could have read over my shoulder. Nim read the bill over my shoulder. She was 11. She was underfoot. She had been in and out of that hall all week, fetching for Tovin, and she was standing at my elbow when the debit came up, because she is always standing at somebody's elbow. She did not ask me what it meant. She went and got a stub of chalk and a slate off the guild hall wall, and she wrote on it, in a child's hand, "Kesh the rope man came in spring," and she held it up so I could see it. Then she said, "I will write down anything you tell me, and you can ask me for it later." And I said she did not have to do that, and she said, "I know." And she carried that slate for 4 months. I have still not decided whether to be grateful for that or not. I went to Mira that night, after the lamps were down to 2, and I told her. I had spent 5 days rehearsing it, and I did it badly. I said, the seat went to me. I said, I typed her name and the thing that was happening to her, and it took the thing and threw away the name, and now nobody can end. She did not say anything for a while. She was in the 3rd cradle with her board propped on a crate where she could see it and a stub of pencil tied to her wrist with twine because she kept dropping it. Then she said, "How long did you have?" I said, "About 4 seconds." She said, "And did it show you what it was going to take before it took it?" I said, "No." She said, "Then say that part first to the next person who asks you, because you have just told me the story in the order that makes it your fault, and that is not the order it happened in." That is Mira. 6 days on a rope cradle with a hole in her that will not close, and she corrects your sequencing. Then she asked the question. She said, "Why you, out of everybody? Why does a maintenance service hand its only seat to a 19-year-old apprentice on a ledge?" I gave her 3 guesses and told her they were guesses. I said maybe it went to whoever was nearest to the fault. I said maybe it went to whoever was holding something at the time. I said maybe it was a lottery, and somebody has to be the one. She said, "Those are 3 different kinds of answer, and only one of them can be true, and you do not know which." I said, "No, I do not." She said, "All right, find out. Not for me, because whoever asks you next will not accept a shrug." Then she said, "And stop standing there like that. You are blocking my board," and I moved, and that was the end of it. By the end of that week, there were 19 in the hall, and Tovin was putting cradles in the yard. They came from Ostley and from Redwarren, and from the parishes down the cut, on carts and hurdles, and one on a door, because word had got out that there was a place where it did not hurt as much. And there was, and it was a guild hall with a stone floor. 19 people, 4 ounces of opium, and a fish cellar that was 2/3 empty, in late summer, with the ice roads 300 miles north and no money to send anybody up them. Tovin stood in his doorway that night and counted the row and said, "We cannot feed these people." Ilsa said, "Feeding them is not the problem." Then she said the number for the ice, and it was 5 days. A month after I broke it, the convoy rode out of Drewall carried about 90 families a day, and one number that everybody on it was thinking about, which was how much ice was left. Tovin had 41 in the hall and the yard. Ilsa had a register with a column for hours since injury that she would not let anybody else write in. The fish cellar was down to a wall of it in the far corner, and we were cutting from that wall. Ice comes from the north. It comes down the ice roads to the head of the cut, and then it comes to us on water, because a ton of ice on a cart is a ton of water by the 3rd day, and a ton of ice in a hull is still ice. Which meant I needed hulls, and hulls in that stretch of the cut meant Jen Marrow. I found her at Toller's Lock with 2 barges tied nose to tail and a tally book open on a crate. She is about 30. She has forearms like a man who splits wood for a living, and she was eating an apple while a carrier begged her for a berth. I said I needed to move ice from the head of the cut to Drewall, regular, as much as her hulls could take. She said, "Everybody needs that." I said, I can pay. She said, no you cannot, and went back to her apple. I said, tell me the price anyway. And she put the apple down and got the tally book and did a thing I have watched her do about 30 times since, and have never once got tired of. She itemized it. Out loud. Hull higher by the day. Loss on the load, which she put at a third and which was honest. A crew of 4 at double, because the road had things on it. Lock fees to Toller Gray, who has the only key on the middle cut and knows it. Then she added a line she called convenience, and I asked what convenience meant, and she said, it means you have nowhere else to go, and I would be a fool not to charge for that, and she wrote a number next to it that made me sit down on the crate. I said that number is robbery. She said, it is not robbery, it is written down, and I will do exactly what is on this page and nothing else at all, and you will never once have to wonder what I meant. I said I could pay 2/3 of it. She said no. I said 2/3 now and the rest against the guild's ice money in spring. She said no. Then she said, but I will do the first 3 runs at the price, and you can watch what you get for it. And if you still think it is robbery after that, do not come back. I paid, and she did exactly what was on the page. 3 runs, on the day, full weight, and not one single thing more, because when I asked her on the second run to also carry down a man's boy on a hurdle, she said that was not on the page and left him standing on the wharf. I hated her for about an hour that day. Then I put the boy on the page and paid for it, and she carried him like he was made of eggs, and after a year she is the only person I am simply glad to see. The road was the problem. It has always been the only road. Draywall sits in a bowl, and the convoy road runs out of it along a ledge for 2 miles above the flooded lower gallery, and there is no second way that a cart can take, and things had started coming down onto it from the drift. When the index tore the sky over the upland, it left things behind, few of them, and stupid, and they came down for the heat and the noise, and the convoy road was 300 carts a week of heat and noise. The first ones were killed in the ordinary way by a carrier with a boar spear, and they did not die, and after that everybody understood what the roads were going to be like from now on. By the second week of autumn, there was a pack of them working the middle of the ledge, about 8 or 10, low and heavy and wrong in the shoulders, and they had learned that a stopped convoy is easier than a moving one. Then Cephalun arrived, and for about 6 hours she was the best thing that had ever happened to us. She came up the ledge road on foot, alone, ahead of her own escort, and I knew who she was before anybody said it because there had been a broadsheet about her in the county town, and Orla had been carrying it around for a fortnight. Best public teardraw in Cairn Vared. Whatever the index gives when it decides to give everything, it gave to a 22-year-old who had been nobody in a wool town in the spring. She can carry what 6 men cannot, and she can get to a place before your plan does. She was not what I expected. She walked into Tovin's yard, looked down the row of cradles for a long time, and then said, right, where is the thing that needs hitting? And when I told her nothing needed hitting, she said that could not be true. She was honest about it, which I did not expect either. She said, I want to be the one who fixes this. I know how that sounds. I have had this for 5 weeks, and I have not yet found a problem it does not solve, and I would like to keep that going. She said it standing in a yard with 41 people in rope cradles behind her. I do not think she was being cruel. I think she genuinely had not yet met a thing that stayed fixed. 2 days later, the pack took a convoy at the narrow bend, and she got there before the message did, and I watched all of it from the crane deck through Bram's glass. It was the most impressive thing I have ever seen a person do. She went into 9 of them alone on a ledge 8 feet wide, and she took them apart. Not fought, took apart. It was over in under 2 minutes, and she was not even breathing hard. The carriers came out from under their carts and cheered her, and she stood in the middle of the road with her arms out and let them. And I remember thinking that at least one thing in this county still worked the way it was supposed to. Then the pieces started moving. 9 animals that had been opened from shoulder to hip, that had lost limbs and jaws, and the greater part of their insides, came back up onto whatever they had left and went on being furious, and they could not be sent anywhere, and they were now much harder to see coming. And it was worse than 9, because the noise of it brought more off the upland over the next 2 days, and the ones already there had learned that the road was where the noise happened. By the end of that week, there were about 20 ruined animals living on 2 miles of the only road out of Draywall. They could not be killed, and they could not be driven, and they could not be starved, and a convoy could not pass. Cepha wanted to go again. She said, give me a day. I will do all 20. I said, you did 9, and now there are 20. She said, that is not the same thing. And I said, it is exactly the same thing. It is the only thing. And it took us both up the hill in front of Bram. She said, then what do you propose? since you are the one with the answer. I said I had no answer. I had a lift and a flooded gallery, and she laughed at me. And then about an hour later she came and found me and asked me to say the lift part again. Drywall has a cable and counterweight lift. It is a stone box the size of a cottage on a cable, and it runs down the face on rails, and it exists to bring cut stone off the terraces without a horse. 2 miles of the convoy road runs on timber props over the old lower gallery, which flooded when I was about 6 and has been a black pond under a stone roof ever since. It has a sluice at the far end that holds the water in, and a stone box the size of a cottage, dropped on a cable, pulls with a force that no team of horses in the county can match, in a direction I get to choose. The plan was to take the road out from under them, not to fight anything, pull the props in sequence, drop that stretch of ledge road and everything standing on it into the flooded gallery, and then make sure it never came out again. That last part was the part that mattered, and it was the part I could not calculate, because I did not know what the sluice would do with 20 animals thrashing against it for the rest of time. So I walked the length of the gallery roof in the dark with a lamp, got down to the sluice head, put both hands flat on the timber, and stood there long enough for it to hurt. Sluice, timber and iron and stone, holds against standing water while the frame remains seated. Seating is maintained by the mass bearing above it. That was all. One entry, one layer, and a comma where no comma belongs, and it changed the whole design in about 4 seconds, because it meant the gate does not hold by being strong. It holds by being pressed into its seat by whatever is sitting on top of it. And what was sitting on top of it, at that moment, was nothing but 2 feet of soil and a footpath. So the road did not just need to fall in. It needed to fall in there, on that spot, and stay. 200 yards of ledge road and about 400 tons of bench stone dropped onto the sluice head would seat that gate harder than it had ever been seated. Then the bill came, the way it always does. Debit applied. 1 item has been removed from your recall. Removed, the face of Dolan Reeve. Nim read it out loud before I could stop her, because she reads everything out loud, and Bram was standing close enough to hear her do it. I did not feel anything. I still cannot explain that part to people. I walked back into the hall an hour later, and Dolan Reeve was in the second cradle with his name chalked on a board at his head, and I looked straight at him. There is a man there. He has a voice I know and a way of saying my name, and a mother in Osley he asks after, and there is no face. There is a place where the face goes, and my eye slides off it like a boot off wet stone. Nim wrote Dolan Reeve, second cradle, gray eyes and a broken tooth in front on her slate, and held it up, and I said thank you, and it did not help at all. And she kept doing it anyway. Bram said nothing to me about it for 2 days. Then he said, "That girl is keeping a book on you." And I said yes. And he said, "Is there anything in it I ought to know?" And I said no, and he let it go. And I have thought about that lie more than most. He did not let the plan go, though. I put it to him in the crane shed with a slate and my numbers on it, and he listened to all of it, and then he folded his arms, which is a thing that means the conversation is over in Drywall, whatever anybody else thinks. He said no, not the plan. The plan is good, the rehearsal. You want to pull 9 props in sequence with a counterweight and you have not pulled 1, and I am not putting my crews on a face to find out what happens on the second one. I said we had 8 days of ice. He said, then in 8 days I will still be right, and we will have practiced, and you will have your road. I said, people are dying on that road. He said nobody is dying anywhere anymore. That is the entire problem. And he was not being clever. He meant it as arithmetic. So we rehearsed for 4 days on the number 2 terrace, on props we did not need, with the counterweight box loaded to a quarter, and the second run went wrong, the way Bram said it would, and it cost us a cable and nobody's legs. Kettle Vance wanted to do it with powder. He had drawn the whole thing out, and his way was faster, and I think it might have worked. Bram would not have live powder on a face with 40 men on the ropes, and said so, and Kettle put his drawing back inside his coat. He said, "One of these days, somebody is going to hand me a plan and let me finish it," Bram said, "one of these days." And Kettle went and sat on the wall and watched us do it slower. Orla wanted to ride the far end and turn the convoys back before they reached the bend. I told her no, because the far end meant riding past the animals to get there, and she said she was faster than they were, and I said, that is what everybody says. We sent a lad on foot over the top instead. It took 10 hours and it worked. She did not speak to me for a day and a half, and she told me at length that caution is just cowardice with a plan attached to it. We did it on a wet morning in the 3rd week of autumn, which we chose because whetstone gives and because the animals lie up in the wet. Bram ran it off a slate with the sequence numbered on it. The counterweight box went down the rails loaded to full, and the first cable took the first 2 props out clean, and the road held, which is what is supposed to happen. then the third and fourth. You do not hear a road go. You hear the props, one at a time, like somebody breaking staves in a cellar, and then a long pause where nothing happens and everybody on the crane deck stops breathing. And then 200 yards of ledge road sits down. It went into the gallery hole mostly, in 3 big pieces with the surface still on top of them. The water came up through the gap in a brown wall and then fell back, and then the noise from underneath started and did not stop. I had counted 18 of them on the road that morning, through the glass. 19 went in. I have never worked out where the extra one came from, and I have thought about it a great deal. We lost 2 men on the 7th prop. It kicked, which is what props do when the load above them changes faster than the sequence allows, and it came back through the trestle line and took Arrow and a bench hand, called Wells Tanner, down onto the broken stone. Arrow was the splitter who had jumped between the terraces on the first day for a laugh. He came out of that morning with both legs finished below the knee and a pelvis in pieces, and he did not die, because nobody dies, and Ilsa wrote his name in the register that night. Wells Tanner lost the use of one arm and most of his hearing on that side and can still walk, and the town has been kinder to Wells, because you can look at Wells. Bram had shored the trestle line, which is why it was 2 and not 9. He said that to me exactly once, in the shed, quietly, and then he did not talk to me about improvisation again for a long time. The road was open by the following week. They cut a new bench across the fallen section, and it carried carts inside 5 days, and the ice came down from the head of the cut on Jen Marrow's hulls, on the day she said it would. The sluice held. It holds better now than it has ever held, because there are 400 tons of drywall bench stone sitting on the seating, as the wording said there would need to be. Sepha came and stood next to me on the crane deck while the water was still settling. She watched the gap for a long time, and then she said, "That was not a fight." I said no. She said, "I could have gone down there for a month and it would have got worse every week." I said yes. She said, "All right," and did not make a speech about it, and I have respected her from that morning even when I have wanted to strangle her. Then she said the thing that I did not have an answer to. She said, "So what is under there now?" 19 animals in a sealed flooded gallery, under 400 tons of stone, in the dark, in the cold, awake, not dying, not able to leave. "For as long as the world lasts," I said, "they will be all right," which is the single most cowardly sentence I have said out loud. And Cephalun looked at me and did not answer it, and neither of us mentioned it again for months. I knew what I had done. Let that be clear before anybody else says it for me. I did not do it by accident, and I did not do it in ignorance, and there was no better plan available, and all 3 of those things can be true at once. Sepha stayed. She did not go back to the county town, and she did not go and be famous somewhere useful. She took a room over the Coopers and started turning up at 6 in the morning like a hired hand, which is not what anybody expected. And Orla came in off the county road 8 days later with a folded notice and the first outside news since the hanging at Call Bridge. Somebody had written down what happened on the Draywall Convoy Road. Not the beasts, the method. A whole road put underwater on purpose, on a plan, with a counterweight and a sluice, and a repeat of it available to anybody who owned the trick. The magistracy was sending a clerk to find out who was doing it, and by what authority, and Orla said he had left the capital already, and would be with us inside a fortnight. The yard went over on a wet Tuesday in mid-autumn, and a crown clerk stood in the gateway throughout, reading me a document about why I was not allowed to stop it. By then, Tovin had 81 of them. 19 in the hall on the stone, the rest outside on trestle lines under canvas, on ground that had been a burial guild's turning yard and had never carried a load in its life. It had rained 12 days. On the Tuesday, the west foot of the 4th row was 4 inches down and still going, the whole row leaning that way, and there were 8 people in it. The one at the bottom of the lean was Cor Sarn, Widow Sarn's boy off the number 3 bench, who came out of the collapse with his jaw and the left side of his face gone. He cannot make a word. He can move one hand, 2 taps for yes, 1 for no. That code was the only instrument anybody had for finding out what was happening inside Cor Sarn, and at the 2nd hour he started tapping, and would not stop. Garrick Pell came through the gate while I was on my back in the mud under the 4th row with a lamp, looking at what the west foot was standing in, which was not soil anymore. "Good coat, leather case over his head?" he asked in a voice that carried for the person responsible for these premises. Tovin said that would be him. Garrick said, "I'm extremely glad to hear it. Unattributed responsibility causes a great deal of extra work." Then he opened the case and read the warrant. All of it. In the rain. 400 words, and he did not skip one. And behind him the row leaned another half inch, and Cor Sarn tapped. I said, We have 8 people going over. Can you finish that inside? He said service is not valid unless made in the presence of the responsible party at the premises named, and the hall is only appurtenant to the premises. The warrant sealed the place pending closure. No person to be added, no alteration, repair, extension, or reconstruction until an inspection had been made and a determination entered. I said, that row is going over. He said, then it will be going over in a sealed condition. I am sorry, and I do mean that. I asked who could lift the seal. He said a magistrate of the second bench on application at Veredhold, 4 days riding and 5 in this, and applications were heard on Thursdays. So that was the shape of the afternoon. 4 people who were all entirely correct, standing in a yard while 8 cradles went over. Bram looked at the row a long time and folded his arms, which in Draywall ends a conversation whatever anybody else thinks. He said, I can move 8 cradles. 14 men, 6 hours, a written sequence. A man on each head rope who has done it before. I said we did not have 6 hours. He said, then you do not have 8 cradles moved. Same sentence. I said the ground had 3 hours in it, and I had measured it. He said, in 3 hours I still will not have a sequence. And what you are asking is for me to be the man who drops Korsarn out of a sling in front of his mother. Ilsa went down the row with a hand on each of them and came back and said 4 of the 8 were not to be lifted today. Korsarn, Aro, the Red Warren girl, and the man whose pelvis is in 7 pieces. I said we have opium. She said, we have 11 ounces for 206 registered persons across 3 parishes. I said, then use some. She said, on what? On convenience of handling. I said it is not convenience. The row is going over. She said, then the row goes over, and I will treat what it does to them, and I will still have the ounce for Aro tonight. She said, he has been screaming twice a night since the road. That ounce was spoken for before you came out here. Tovin would not use the beast shed, and that broke my patience because the shed was the answer, and everybody in the rain could see it. Stone building, 40 by 20, sound roof. 22 cradles inside 2 hours, dry. I said, the shed, now. Tovin said no. I said it is 40 feet of dry floor standing empty. He said, it is empty because of what I used it for. I have laid people in that building, in boxes, the night before their funerals, with candles at the head. Every family in this parish has stood in that room. I said it is a floor. He said, it is a floor to you. Go and ask Widow Sarn where her husband lay the night before we carried him out, and then come back and say floor to me again. I did not go and ask her. The shed stayed empty. The row kept leaning, and I got the load off the west foot in the end the small way. And it cost me. A slung load does not care what is under it. It cares what is above it. The hall's north wall has 3 iron tie rings set at 8 feet for hoisting caskets through the loft door, and stone does not sink in the rain. A casket with a man in it is 400 pounds. A cradle with ice at the hip is 340. I did not know what was behind that stone, and nobody was left in Draywall who had set the rings. So I went round the back, out of the gateway's line of sight, put both hands flat on the middle ring, and stood there until it hurt. Ring. Wrought iron in dressed stone. Bears while the tail remains bedded. Bedding fails by the mortar and not by the iron, and fails at the lowest ring first where the wall takes water. The lowest ring was under the downpipe, and it was the one I would have used, because it was nearest the lean. So I left it alone, took the 2 upper rings, and ran the 3rd leg onto the crane shed corner post I guyed myself in September. Debit applied. The following is no longer available to your recall. The road between Draywall and Ostley, in the direction of Ostley. 9 miles, and I have ridden it 200 times. Going out from Draywall, there is nothing in my head until the Ostley toll house. Coming back, it is as it always was. Nim wrote on the slate, the Ostley Road, left at the burnt elm, then the ford, then up, held it where I could see it, and said, that one is a nuisance. 14 men, and about 90 minutes swung the west third onto the wall rings, and nobody had to be lifted out of a cradle to do it, which was the entire point. Korsarn stopped tapping halfway through. His mother came out and stood at his head for the rest of it, with her hand flat on the name board, and did not say a word to anybody. Then Garrick came out of the lean, looked at 3 cradles hanging off a wall that had not been hanging off a wall an hour before, and said, that is an alteration to the premises. I said, it is a rig. He said a rig made fast to a sealed building is an alteration and he would have to enter it. I said, read me the warrant again. He said he had read it. I said, read me the part with the words in it. And he did. because being asked to read something aloud is the one request Garrick Pell has never in his life refused. He got to the third clause and I stopped him there. It said the premises known as the Draywall Burial Ground and the buildings appurtenant thereto. I said this is not a burial ground. He said of course it is, it belongs to the burial guild. I said the burial ground is over that lane behind the wall. This is the turning yard. You walked past the difference coming in. He said the yard is appurtenant to it. I said, then it is appurtenant to a burial ground, and a warrant to close a burial ground closes a ground and its buildings, and there is nobody buried in any of these. He said that was a distinction without a difference. I said, you refused Tovin this morning, because he had. Tovin had asked him to enter the 81 on the parish register, and he had refused in the doorway, on the grounds that the register of burials records burials, and not one of these has been buried. He remembered. He stood in the rain with the warrant in his hand and worked all the way through it, and I have never seen a man look less pleased about being right. He said, then this is not a burial ground for the purpose of the register, but is a burial ground for the purpose of the warrant. I said, which one? He said, that is exactly the difficulty. Then he sat down on the mounting block and said, I will require a barrel, a slate, and somebody who writes neatly. Not you. Your figures are legible, and your letters are a disgrace. He did not move off that block for 5 hours. Garrick Pell cannot leave a thing unnamed. He had come to close a category, found the category did not fit, and to him the only thing worse than a wrongly named place is a place with no name in the record at all. So he made one, on a barrel, on the back of his own warrant, out of 3 older instruments he knew by heart. He built it out of guardianship. Persons of the class living and incapable of removal. Such a place requires a custodian, named on the instrument, personally answerable, entered at the county. No other person may remove one of them without that custodian's hand. He read it out and then said, this is not within my authority to grant. I said, then do not grant it. He said, I have not finished. It is not within my authority to grant. It is within my authority to record. There is no man senior to me inside 4 days. That row is still leaning, and I am not standing here until Thursday. And he signed it. Then he said the thing I have thought about more than anything else said in that yard. He said, I have just made this place worth taking, and you should all understand that before anybody thanks me. Tovin read it twice, standing up with the rain getting into the paper, and handed it back and said no. Garrick said, somebody must be named. That is the whole mechanism. Tovin said, then name somebody else. Whoever signs this decides who comes in, who goes out, and who gets the cold. And I have buried these families' people for 40 years. Ilsa said, I will take it. She said, the register is already mine in fact. This only makes it true in writing and puts the rationing where somebody can be asked to justify it. Tovin said no, faster than he had said it to Garrick. Ilsa said, give me one reason that is not sentiment. Tovin said, you would be correct every single time, and there would be nobody left who could tell you no. That look across the barrel told me a good deal about the coming winter. There had been a man under the lich gate since noon. Gray coat, good boots, dry, waiting the way you wait when the weather is doing your work for you. A house Varan agent, 3 days in the parish, with cash and a form. The form was for Cor Sarn. He had put it in her hand before the row began to lean, and she had folded it into her apron and gone to stand by her son. Now she took it out, wet through, and read it to the yard. 12 marks. Lawful custody of Cor Sarn to House Varan, and carriage, and a place where he would be kept warm, and worked at whatever he was still able to do. Then she stopped and looked at the line again, and said, it does say warm. Say that part out loud. That part is not a lie. I have read it 40 times looking for the lie, and that is not where it is. Then she turned to Garrick and said, your paper. If Tovin Ash's name is on it, can anybody take my son out of this yard? He said no. She said, the crown. He said, not without an order of the bench. She said, a house. He said no. She said, a physician. He said, no, not the custodian's own physician, not the chapter, not me, the custodian's hand or a bench. And the nearest bench is 4 days off and sits on Thursdays. She said, then put your name on it, Tovin Ash, and I will witness it. And she took the pen out of Garrick's hand before anybody had agreed to anything. Tovin signed. On a barrel, in the rain, with 81 people behind him, and his hand was not steady. Widow Sarn signed under him as first witness. The agent watched from under the lich gate and did not come in, because 4 minutes earlier he could have, and now he could not. He put his hat back on, called across that 3 parishes east they were signing, and went for his horse. Margaret Saul had arrived during the wall rig and stood under the canvas watching us the way a woman prices a horse. Insurers' Guild actuary, with a leather roll of tables she never put down on wet ground. She said, I have a question nobody in 3 counties will answer. Who is liable for a man who is neither well nor dead? Garrick said, that is not settled. She said, I know. I am asking, who is liable? Nobody answered, so she answered it herself, and she was the first person in the country to say the numbers out loud. She said, the guild's tables give Cairn Vered 60,000 endings in a year. 6 weeks have gone. That is 7,000 who have not ended and are therefore somewhere. Tovin said, in their beds. She said, most of them. And their families will manage for a while, and then they will not. And that is a slower problem than yours. She said, but 1 in 9 of an ordinary year's endings is violent. Crushing, falls, burns, childbirth, the roads. You cannot manage those in a bed with a daughter and a jug. Those need what is standing in this yard. She said, 780 of them. Nationally, in 6 weeks. You have 81, and nobody else has built anything at all. Tovin asked what the figure does. She said, it does not do anything. It accumulates. There is no outflow. This time next year, you hold 7,000, the year after 14, and I have not put a rate of increase on it because the roads are getting worse. Then she wrote in her roll and said, thank you. That is the first honest count anybody has given me, and I intend to sell it. Orla came in off the county road at dusk with her horse blown and a printed notice in an oilskin, too pleased with herself to get off properly. She had ridden from the head of the cut in a day and a half, which is not possible, and I said so. And she said, and yet. She had taken the notice off a church door with the clerk still holding the nail. It was Marshal Rask Volds of the Northern Army, read aloud in every parish from the ice roads to the capital. Half of it was the seizure. The cold caverns on the northern road, the ice houses at Fell Harrow and Broken Mile, under army administration from the 1st of the month, and every person incapable of removal entered on a register. The other half was Vold explaining himself, and it was the most reasonable thing anybody had put in writing since the gray letters came. He wrote that a state whose business had always been settled by ending had lost the instrument it was built on. There could be no succession now, because nothing succeeds, no term, because nothing expires, no discharge, because nothing discharges. And then, he wrote the sentence that everybody in Cairn Vered could still say back to you a year later. He wrote that he would therefore not be bound, not by court, not by contract, not by oath, not by petition, and not by any instrument that any living man could draft. Orla read it out in the doorway, with the rain behind her, got to that line, and stopped. She said, he put that in a notice. He had a clerk set it in type. He read it over and let it go out. Garrick was still on the mounting block with his own instrument drying on his knee, the one with a living man's name on it. He read Vold's notice through twice, folded it very carefully, and handed it back. He said, that is a proclamation. Orla said, so. He said, so a proclamation binds the man who issues it, in every court in this kingdom, and I do not believe he knows that, because nobody ever reads their own to the end. The first hard frost of that year came down on the night the Corbin boy went past Draywall on a barge, and I was standing on the wharf with the ice in the ropes watching him go, and no instrument in the world to stop it. Ada Corbin had signed 4 days earlier in Howling Parish, 2 miles the other side of the county line, where Tovin's paper meant nothing, because Garrick had entered it at our county and not at theirs. Her boy is Whit Corbin. He was under a wall when the mill loft came in during the 2nd week, and he has a spine like Mira's and a chest that took the lintel, and he had been at home on a door in his mother's front room since the end of summer. Orla brought the news up the towpath at a run because she could not get her horse past the lock. She said, they have taken the Corbin boy. And I said, which barge? And she said, the one with the tar stripe, and it is already at the lower gate. I said, how much did they give her? Orla said, 9 marks and a sack of meal, and she said it like she wanted me to be angry with Ada Corbin, and I would not be, and I am still not. Ada Corbin had been turning her son twice a night since August, with nobody to help her, and no ice at all. 9 marks and a sack of meal is not a betrayal. It is what happens when a woman has been awake for 10 weeks. Jen Marrow was tied up at the lower gate loading barrel staves, and I went straight to her, and she had the tally book open before I finished the first sentence. I said, I need to get down the cut to whatever works that barge is going to, and I need to get back. She said, that is the low works at Ashcombe. Everybody knows that, and it is 2 days down and 3 back against the water. I said, name it. She said, hull hire 2 days, crew of 3, lock fees at Toller Gray's gate both ways, and then she stopped and looked at me and said, and I am not charging you convenience on this one. I said, why not? She said, because you are going to lose, and I do not take money off a man for the privilege of watching him lose. It is bad for repeat custom. Then she wrote the number down, and it was still robbery. I said, you have never once given me a discount. She said, I have never once given anybody a discount. She said, and you have never once had to guess what a run would cost you. And of those two things, only one of them is rare, and you know perfectly well which. Ashcombe is a bowl of black ground with 3 chimneys and a canal basin cut into it, and it belongs to House Varon, and it has done since Colvin Varon's grandfather. The low works is what they call the gallery under the 3rd chimney, where the seam runs wet. It floods to about waist height and it makes gas, and before the gray letters, it was worked in shifts of 40 minutes with a boy on a bell at the head. Nobody had worked it in 10 years. It was not economic. Those are the words in the guild return, and I read it later, and it means the shifts were too short and the men kept having to be carried out. When I got there, it was being worked in shifts of 9 days. I stood at the head of it on the plank walk for about an hour before anybody came to move me on, and I counted, because I count, 31 of them, in the water, in the dark, with the lamps on the walls behind wire. They were passing baskets, that is all. Baskets of wet spoil hand to hand up a line of 31 people who could not be poisoned into stopping, from the face to the basket cage, and the cage went up every 4 minutes. Some of them were standing. Some of them were being held upright by the 2 either side, and the 2 either side kept doing it while they passed the baskets, because that is what the line does. Let me be accurate about the men. They were not driven and there was nobody with a stick. There was a foreman on the plank walk with a slate, and he counted the cages and he was perfectly civil to me. Colvin Varon came down at about the 4th hour, and he did not have me thrown out, and that was the whole of his method. He is about 40, and he came down the plank walk in a good coat with his hands behind his back, like a man showing you his glass house. And he stood next to me, and looked at the line and let me look at it too. He said, "You are the draywall rigger." I said I was. He said, "Ash's yard, the one with the clerk's instrument on it." I said yes. He said, "That was well done, genuinely. I mean that. And I have had my own people asking me how it was managed." Then he said, "Look as long as you like. I would rather you looked properly than went home and told it wrong." So I looked properly, and he stood there with me, and after a while he started explaining. And the thing about Colvin Varon that nobody believes until they have stood next to him is that he does not lie. He said, "I have 4,000 and some dependents across the Ashcombe holdings, colliers, their families, the canal crews, the carters, the 2 villages. Before the gray letters, I was a year from selling all of it to the crown for the canal rights." He said, "The seam under your feet is the best coal in the county, and it has been underwater since my father's time, because we could not put a crew in it for more than 40 minutes. I said, "And now you can." He said, "Now I can. And I pay for it. Ask my clerk what the custody instruments cost. Ask him what I pay the families quarterly. It is not a purchase. It is a maintenance, and it is due whether the man works or not." I said, "They are standing in gas." He said, "Yes." I said, "They cannot come out." He said, "They cannot be made to stop being in it either," which is a different sentence, and it is the one the law is written on. I said, "That is a lawyer's answer." He said, "It is my answer, and I wrote the instruments myself, and I will show them to you if you want to read one, because most people who come here have opinions and no reading." I said, "Do you go down there?" He said, "No." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Because it would be theater. I am no use to them in the water and a great deal of use to them in the counting house. And if that disgusts you, I cannot help it. It is still the true answer." And then he had his clerk bring me one, which is the single stupidest thing Colvin Varon ever did, and it took him 7 months to find out why. It was 4 pages, and it was excellent. I have never seen a better piece of drafting, and I have since heard Garrick Pell say the same thing with his ears going red. I held it for a long time with the paper flat between both hands, and I stood still on that plank walk until it hurt. Instrument of custody, private. Binds the person named while the instrument remains in force. Force is maintained by the considerations stated within it. That was all of it. 1 entry, 1 layer, and it was airtight, and I could not find a single loose thread in it, because there was not one at the depth I could reach. It told me the instrument holds while the money is paid. Varon paid the money. Varon would go on paying the money, because he had 4,000 people and a working seam and every reason in the world to pay it. That was the first time since the collapse that I stood in front of a problem, put my hands on it, spent the price, and came away with nothing at all. Debit applied. 1 item withdrawn from your recall. The tune your mother sang over the tally of the wash. I did not know until I read it that there had been a tune. I know there was a wash and a tally and a mother. Nim could not write that one down for me because I could not tell her what it was. Varen watched me go still and come back and did not remark on it, because to him I was a tired young man reading a contract in bad light, and that is what it looked like. Then he did the thing that I carried for a year. He said, "You may take one of them home with you." I said, "What?" He said, "One. Anyone. I will release the instrument. I will pay the carriage, and my clerk will have it drawn before your boat turns round." Then he put a hand out towards the water, the way you show a man a field, and said, "Go down the line and choose." Nobody on the plank walk said anything. The foreman went on counting cages. The baskets kept going hand to hand, and the men in the water had all heard him, because sound carries in a wet gallery better than anywhere on earth. I said, "That is obscene." He said, "It is generous, and you will take it, and that is what you should understand about yourself before you go home." Then he said it, and he said it quietly, and not one of his own men laughed, which made it worse. He said, "The difference between you and me is not that I bought them and you did not. It is that I had somewhere to put them and you came here to look. You have a rope and a good heart and no instrument, and in this kingdom that makes you a spectator." And he said, "When you want them, do not come and stand on my walk, being sad at me. Write something better." I did not have an answer. I have had about 400 since. I did not have one then, and I stood on a plank over 31 people with a contract in my hand and nothing to say. It was old Cassel who ended it, from the water, and he did not raise his voice much. He said, "Me, take me." Then he said, "I have been down here since the second week, which is longer than any of them, and I can still talk. And out of the 31 of us, I am the one that is worth anything to you." Somebody further up the line said his name in a way I have not forgotten. Cassel said, "No, be quiet. He needs one who can speak, and I am the only one of us who is any good at it." I said, "I am not going to pick a man out of a line." Cassel said, "You are not picking." I picked. Then he said, "And if you leave me here to be fair to the rest of us, you have come all this way and done nothing, and I will have to listen to you being fair for the rest of my life." So I said his name to the clerk, and the clerk wrote it, and Varen signed it in about 10 seconds without looking at it. Then Varen named his consideration, because there is always one, and this is the part I did not tell anybody for 8 days. He said, "The carriage is mine, and the release is mine, and I want your winter store." I said, "We have 300 weight in the fish cellar, and it is every scrap of cold drywall has." He said, "I know exactly what you have. My agent counted it in October. It is not enough for 81 people, and it is exactly enough for my working face." He said, "You are going to say no, and then you are going to go and sit on that boat, and then you are going to come back up this walk and say yes, and I would rather you did the second thing now so that we both keep our afternoon." I said yes on the walk. I did not go and sit on the boat. I did not send to Tovin, and there was a relay rider at Ashcombe Basin, and the message would have been in his hand inside 2 days. I decided, standing there, that Tovin Ash would say no, and that I knew better, and that it was easier to be forgiven than refused. I have written that sentence out properly because it is the whole of what is wrong with me, and it took a much worse day than this one to teach me. Jen Marrow carried old Cassel out on a bed of staves with a canvas over him, and 4 points of rope, and she did it beautifully, and she charged me for the staves. I said, "The staves were already in the hull." She said, "They were, and now they are under a man, and I cannot sell staves that have had a man on them. Ask anybody." And she was right, and I paid, and she did exactly what was on the page. She said one other thing. On the second night, with her feet on the tiller and Cassel asleep under the canvas, she said, "I do not want to know what you gave for him." I said, "You will hear it anyway." She said, "Yes, but not from you, and then I would have to have an opinion about you, and I like our arrangement." Old Castle talked for most of 3 days. He told me the names of all 31, in order along the line, and made me say them back, and Nim wrote them out when we landed, and that list is still in the register at the yard. Margaret Saul got to Ashcombe a fortnight after I left it, because I told her where to go, and she did not need telling twice. She did not go into the gallery. She sat in the Ashcombe counting house for 2 days with the guild's authority and the works returns, which are public, and she did arithmetic. Then she published it in the Insurers Guild Circular, which goes to every underwriter, factor, and bank in Cairn Vered, and which nobody outside that trade had ever read before that winter. She priced the low works 2 ways: what the coal from that face is worth on the wharf at Vered Hold, and what it would cost to raise the same coal with living crews at 40-minute shifts, which is the reason it had been underwater for 10 years. The difference was 406 marks a week. She printed the number, and under it, she printed the count, which was 31, and she divided one by the other, and she let the second number stand on its own line. Then she wrote one sentence of her own, and it is the only sentence I have ever known Margit Sol to write that was not a figure. She wrote, "This is the current market price of a man who cannot be released, and it is now known." It did not free anybody, and Varen's return went up that quarter. But 3 factoring houses would not take his paper after it. The Crown Canal office made him bid against himself for the first time in his life, and he has never once mentioned it to me, which is how I know it landed. I told Tovin about the ice on the 9th day, at the yard, in the dark, because I could not do it in front of the row. He did not shout. I would have preferred it. He said, "When?" I said, "On the walk, at Ashcombe, on the day." He said, "So you had 8 days." I said I did. He said, "And a relay rider at the basin." I said yes. He said, "So it was not that you could not ask me. It was that you did not want the answer." I said, "You would have said no." He said, "Of course I would have said no. That is not the point, and you know it is not the point." Then he said the part I still hear. He said, "I have 81 people and the ice belongs to them, not to me, and I cannot give it away because it is not mine, and neither is it yours, and you have just spent it on a man I am very glad to have." He said, "I am glad to have him. Understand that I am saying both things." I said, "Tell me what you want me to do about it." He said, "Nothing. That is not kindness. The ice is gone, and I will not invent a penance so that you can pay it and feel level with me again." Then he said, "What I want is for the next one to be a question. That is all. Ask me and let me be wrong." The frost held for a week after that, and then it broke and came back harder, and by the first week of proper winter, the fish cellar was a stone room with nothing in it, and Ilse had begun refusing by name. And on the 9th night of the frost, the flooded lower gallery under the old convoy road, the one I dropped 200 yards of draywall onto in the autumn, started making a noise that it had not made before. In the second week of proper winter, the flooded gallery under the old convoy road began to make a sound like a cart going over a bridge a long way off, about every 40 minutes, from underneath 400 tons of stone that had no business moving. That winter taught draywall something nobody expected, which is that free cold is not a mercy at all. It is a hazard, and the hazard is not to the people you think. The yard had gone entirely outdoors by then. A hard frost does what 300 weight of fish cellar ice used to do, and it does it to 200 people at once for nothing. And Tovin had the row under canvas with the sides rolled up. The unreleased were the only people in Draywall in no danger from that winter. They cannot freeze to anything worse than they already are. It was the holders who were going down. Tovin lost 4 men to frostbite in the first fortnight, working the night rows, because turning a cradle takes bare hands, and bare hands at that temperature have about 7 minutes in them, which is how Halder Vane stopped being a joke. He walks the night rows with his hands on people. He puts them on a holder's wrist for a count of 30, and that man gets another 40 minutes, and Halder gets nothing back, ever, and he goes home at dawn colder than anybody. I asked him once whether it took anything out of him. He said, "No, that is the whole trouble with it. And if it did, I could at least tell people what it costs, and they would take it seriously." Ilse had the opium, and she was refusing by name in front of the person refused, twice a day, out loud, because she will not do it any other way. She had a slate at the head of the row with 5 names on it, and everybody could read it. Arrow was on it every night. Cor Sarn was never on it, because Cor cannot ask, and Ilse said a man who cannot ask does not get to the front of the queue for being quiet. Widow Sarn argued that one for 3 weeks. Ilse said, "Bring me a way for him to tell me, and I will put him on the slate tomorrow." And she came back with a board with 16 words painted on it that Cor's good hand could reach 7 of. Ilse put him on the slate that night. It is the only argument I ever saw anybody win against her, and it was won with a piece of painted board. Now the gallery, which is the part of that winter that mattered. We had put 19 animals and the fallen road into a flooded chamber in the autumn under 400 tons of bench stone, and the wording had said the seating is maintained by the mass bearing above it. In the first week of winter, the water at the gap started coming up brown, and stayed brown, and it had been clear since the second day after we did it. Silt clears. It is the oldest thing anybody in a quarry knows. You muddy a sump, you come back in 4 days, and the fines are on the bottom and the water is glass. It was not going down. 12 days and it was as brown on the 12th as on the 1st. And when I put a stick in the fill on the bank, the stick went in like it was going into a barrel of grain instead of into a 10-week-old spoil bank. I did the ordinary thing first and put more mass on it. 8 cartloads of bench stone across the new bench, tipped on the gate head over 2 days. And I stood there and watched them not do anything. You can feel a spoil bank take a load. It grunts. It drops an inch, and then it is a foot. That one stood where it was. The water came up browner, and 40 minutes later, the sound came again. That was the first time I understood that I had not broken one rule. Margit Saul was in Drewall that week buying the yard's returns off Toven, and she came out to the gap with me because she had heard there was something to look at. She said, "Explain it to me as a load." I said, "Spoil does not settle anymore, or not here." She said, "Since when?" I said, "I do not know," and that was true. Then she said the thing nobody else in the country had thought to say. She said, "Your gray window has a number at the bottom of it. Everybody's does. Mine has read one since the day it came, and last Thursday it read 2. I said, "It does that." She said, "No, nothing does that. A number that has sat at 1 for 4 months does not go to 2 on a Thursday for no reason. And a fortnight later, a spoil bank in the county where all of this started stops behaving like a spoil bank." She said, "What is it counting?" I said I did not know. She said, "You do that with your face when you are not lying and you are not answering, and I will not ask you again this year." Then she wrote something in her roll and went back to the yard. She did not tell anybody. She sold the observation to 3 underwriters as a general note about the Drewall district without my name in it, because Margit Saul sells information and does not spend it. Kettle Vance was the answer, and I knew it before I walked up to his door, and I also knew how the conversation was going to go, and it went that way. I said, "I need the gallery under the old road filled and the gate shut permanently, and I cannot do it by putting things on top of it." He said, "So you want it shot?" I said, "Yes." He said, "No." I said, "I have not asked you anything yet." He said, "You have asked me to blow a chamber roof over standing water with 19 live things in it and a village a mile downstream, on a plan I have not seen, in a winter. And the answer to all of that is no." I said, "I will bring you the plan." He said, "Bring me the plan and I will read it, and then I will tell you what is wrong with it, and then you will change it, and then I will tell you what is still wrong with it. That is the arrangement. There is no other arrangement." Then he said, "And I want one thing before I read a line of it. I need to know when that gate goes. Not roughly. I have been listening to it for a fortnight, and it is a pin and not a strap. And if it is a pin, then it goes all at once, and I need the hour." I said, "Nobody can give you the hour." He said, "Then nobody can give me a shot." I went down to the gatehead at first light with a lamp because I could not think of anything else to do, and I put my hands flat on the timber and expected the same 6 words back. I had read that sluice already. You do not get anything new from a thing you have already read. That is how it had worked every single time since the guild hall. 1 entry, 1 layer, and then nothing there. That morning, it did not stop at the layer. Sluice, timber, and iron in stone. Holds against standing water, while the frame remains seated. Seating is maintained by the mass bearing above it, and then, under it, in the same gray, where there had never been anything before. Unless the bearing mass is unsettled, in which case, the frame is held by the iron alone, until the iron parts, which occurs at the pin and not at the strap, at a bearing of 110 hundredweight upon the pin. I did not want it. It is the part I still cannot explain properly to anybody who was not standing on that bank. It arrived like a door opening in a wall I had been leaning on, and I went down on one knee in the silt. The nosebleed started before the text finished, and it did not stop for 2 hours. I lost the rest of that morning. I came back to myself sitting against the sluice housing with my hands wet, and no memory of the hour and a half in between, and my lamp had burned out. Debit applied. The following is no longer available to your recall: the face of your mother. There is no picture of my mother anywhere in the world. There was never going to be. She was a rigger's wife in a quarry town, and the only place her face was kept was in me, and now it is not. Nim could not write that one down. She tried. She sat with the slate for a while, and then she put it in her lap and said, "Tell me one thing about her that is not her face." And I said she had a bad thumb from a mangle, and she wrote thumb, and we left it there. I could not make the window come up again for 4 days, neither the reed nor the count. It was simply not there. The way a hand you have slept on is not there. But I had the number, 110 hundredweight on the pin. I took it to Kettle, and he had a boy measure the pin bearing with a spring balance off the crane store 3 times at 3 hours apart, and it came out at 94, and then 97, and then 99. He sat down on a barrel with the 3 figures and worked for about 20 minutes and then said, 8 days, give or take a day and a half. And now I will read your plan. My plan was 1 shot. Drop the chamber roof at once, fill the void, done in an afternoon. He said no, and then he explained it, and he was right, and it took him 3 minutes. He said, "You have a chamber full of water. You put the roof into it in one go, and the water has to go somewhere in one go. And the only place it can go is at your gate. And your gate is a pin at 99. He said, you would burst it with your own solution. The water would come out at the village in a wall with 19 of those things riding on it. And you would have done that on purpose, and I would have lit it. I said, then what? He said, 5 charges. From the far end, walking towards the gate, you put the rock in behind the water, and you let the water leave in front of it, out of the gate, slowly, with the gate open and a stopboard in the channel to take the animals. I said, open the gate. He said, open it yourself with a jack on the day at your own hour instead of letting a pin choose the hour for you. Then it is a drain and not a burst. There is the difference between me and Kettle Vance. I had spent 8 days working out how to keep a gate shut. He looked at the same numbers and said the gate has to open, and it has to open when we say. Bram would not put a crew on the far end at night, and that was the fight that took 3 days, because 5 charges walking towards a gate is a 2-day job, and the short daylight would not carry it. He said, no night work on a wet face in January. I said, we have 8 days. He said, then we have 8 days of daylight, which is about 55 hours, and I will sequence it into 55 hours, or I will not sequence it. He did. It was tight, and it held, and 2 of his men got frost in their feet, and both kept them. The one who did not was Orla, and it did not happen at the gallery at all. The stopboard and the drain meant the lower village had to be cleared for a day. Lobeck, 61 houses on the flat, a mile below the gate, and they had to be up on the shoulder road with their stock from dawn. We sent the word on the 3rd day by a walker over the top track, because the river road had ice on it, and the ford at the bend had been open water since Tuesday, and the walker had 8 hours and only needed 6. Orla wanted to ride it. I said no. Bram said no. Kettle said no and gave a reason, which was that a horse on that ford in January is a horse in the river. She said, a walker takes 6 hours and I take 2. And if that stopboard is not braced by dark, you will want those 4 hours back, and you will not be able to buy them. I said the walker has 8 hours, and the job is not until Thursday. She said, and if it is Wednesday. Arguing with Orlovec is always like that. She is not stupid, and she was not being brave. She had a real point, and it was the wrong size for the risk, and I said no again, and thought that was the end of it. She went at 4 in the morning without telling anybody, because she had worked out that the answer would be no again if she asked again, and she took the ford. The ice at the bend is river ice over moving water, and it is thin at the bank and thicker in the middle, which is the exact opposite of what a rider expects, and she went through 14 feet out with the horse. The horse got out. She did not, because she went under the shelf and came up on the wrong side of it, and there was nobody on that road at 4 in the morning in January. She was in the water for 5 hours and 40 minutes. We know the number because she counted the bells from Lobeck Church and she told us afterwards, and she was right to within a quarter of an hour. She could not drown. She could not lose consciousness. She could not be released. She held onto the underside of the shelf with both hands in water, moving at about 4 miles an hour, and she counted 6 bells, and then she started shouting when she heard the first cart. Half of Lobeck came down the bank. They got a ladder out flat on the ice, and a man went along it on his belly, and they had her out inside 20 minutes of hearing her, and the village watched them do it. She was talking the entire time. That is what people in Lobeck still tell you about it. Not the ice and not the ladder. That she was talking the whole way up the bank and telling them the ford was worse than it looked, and to put a marker on it. Ilse got to her that evening. She did not do anything for 2 days, except keep her warm and dry, and look at her hands, because there was nothing to do, and she told Orla that to her face on the first evening. She said, I will promise you nothing, and I will not take anything off you today. Frost does its work over about a week, and then it is finished, and until it is finished, cutting is guessing. Orla said, tell me the guess. Ilse said, most of both hands. She said, the thumbs may hold, and I will fight for the thumbs. And the left side of your face from the cheekbone down was against the ice, and I do not think that comes back. Orla said, can I ride? Ilse said that was the wrong question, and she should ask it again in a week. Orla said, it is not the wrong question, it is the only one, can I ride? Ilse said, yes, you will ride. You will not hold a rein the way you hold it now, and you will not do a buckle without help, and you will not carry a rope for anybody ever again, but you will ride. Orla said, all right then, and asked for the ford at the bend to be marked before Thursday, and would not talk about her hands again that week. I have blamed myself for that Ford for a year, and she has never once let me say it out loud without correcting the record, briskly, like a woman fixing a figure in a ledger. We fired the gallery on the Thursday. Kettle laid the 5 charges from the far end over 2 days, and I jacked the gate at 7 in the morning, with Bram counting and the stopboard braced across the channel with 14 feet of timber. The water left in front of the rock for 3 hours. Then the roof came in behind it in 5 walking steps, and the last of it dropped the gate head down into a chamber that was no longer there. There is no gallery now. There is a hill with a stone face on it where the old road ran, and it is dry, and it has been dry since, and the 19 are in it. Kettle stood on the new bench when the dust went down and looked at it for a while, and then said, "That is the first thing I have been allowed to finish since August." Then he said the rest of it to Bram and not to me, which is how that man pays a compliment. He said, "I had a pin I could not get a gauge onto and no hour to work to. The boy brought me the number. He said without it there is no shot, and without the shot that gate picks its own morning, and Lobeck is under it with 19 of those things riding down on the water. And when I could get the window up again, 4 days later, the number at the bottom had not gone back down. Known issues, 2. It had read 1 since the afternoon of the collapse. The hollow choir came into Drewall in the last week of January with 61 carts, and they did not ask anybody's permission, and they did not have to, because everything they did was legal, and every single thing they said was true. They came up the new bench road in the afternoon, and they went straight past the yard without stopping, which I did not understand until I saw where they were going, which was the square. By dark, they had built a row in front of the market cross. Not a hospital and not a shelter. A row. 61 cradles in the open on the flagstones, with the sides of the canvas up and lamps at the head of everyone. They were the worst cases in 3 counties, and the choir had been collecting them since October, and they had brought them out where the town buys its bread. Let me be exact about what the hollow choir is, because I have heard it described since by people who were not there, and they always get it wrong. They are a hospice order, that is all they ever were. They sat with people who were ending, and they held their hands, and they did it for nothing. And they had been doing it for 200 years. On the day the gray letters came, every single thing they knew how to do stopped working, and unlike the executioners and the undertakers, they did not lose a trade. They lost the thing they were for. Prior Odd Kane is about 60, and he looks like a man who has not slept properly since August, because he has not. He walks the row himself. He was walking it when I first saw him, at about the 9th hour, in the dark. In the snow. He does not preach. Nobody ever expects that about him. He never once, in all that winter, made a speech in that square. He walked the row, and he let people walk it with him, and he answered questions. The Index put a line in every window in the country the day they arrived, which I have never known whether to find funny. We are aware of increased demand in some areas. Thank you for your patience. The Register came out on the 3rd day, and it is still the most effective document produced in Cairnverad in that year, and it was produced by a novice of about 19 with bad handwriting. Brother Osk keeps it. He started it in the 2nd week of the autumn on his own, and nobody told him to. And by January, it had 1,000 names in it from 4 counties. It is not an argument. It has 4 columns. Name, parish, the injury, in about 6 words, and the 4th column, which is the one that did the work, and which is headed hours. Not days, hours. He counts them from the hour of the injury, and he keeps counting, and he goes round with a pencil and updates them. And he had been doing that for 5 months by the time he got to Drewall. On the 3rd day, he stood on the market cross steps in the snow and read out 40 of them at random. Name, parish, injury, hours. Sim Vale, Red Warren, both legs and the pelvis under a wall. 3,406 hours. Ilse Rand went to that reading. She stood at the back with her arms folded and did not move for any of it. And afterwards, she went up to Brother Osk and asked to see the book, and he gave it to her without asking who she was. She read it for about 20 minutes standing in the snow. Then she gave it back and said, "Your arithmetic is correct, and your method is sound, and it is the only honest instrument in this country." Osk said, "Then give me yours." She said no. He said, "Doctor, I have 1,000, and you have 206, and between us that is the north." She said, "I know exactly what it is. I am not giving it to you." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because a register is a list of who can be found. Mine is a rationing document, and it exists so that I can say no to the right people. Yours is a persuasion document, and it exists so that your prior can put it in front of a magistrate." She said, "Both of those are legitimate and they cannot be the same book." Oski said, "We would never use it against them." She said, "You would never mean to." Then she said, "I am not calling you a liar. I am telling you what a document does when it is out of your hands, and I am the person who will still be here when it is." He went away, and she made an enemy of a national movement in about 3 minutes, standing in the snow, on a principle, and she has never once regretted it out loud. Old Cassell asked to be carried up to the square on the 4th day. I did not want him to go. He had been out of Ashcombe 8 weeks, and he was better than he had been, which means he was cold, dry, sedated twice a day, and not standing in gas. And I said the square was 2 hours of moving in January. He said, "And how long was Ashcombe?" I said, "That is not the same." He said, "No, it is not. It is much shorter, and I would like to go." Tovin carried him himself with 3 men, and they did it in a hurdle with the rope cradle slung inside it, and they took an hour and a half over a 15-minute walk, because Tovin will not jolt a man. Nobody asked old Cassell to speak. He asked. He got Osk to prop the hurdle up on the cross steps so that he was sitting rather than lying. And then he talked for about 20 minutes to a market square in a flat voice, with a hand over his mouth half the time because of the cold. He did not describe the gallery. That is what everybody expects, and it is not what he did. He said the names of the 31, in order along the line, the way he had said them to me on the boat. Then he said, "I am the one who got out, and I will tell you why. A man came who could not do anything, and another man let him take one of us to prove that he could not do anything. And I put my hand up because I can still talk." He said, "That is all it is. I am not here because I was owed it or because I was the worst. I am here because I am useful to somebody who was standing on a plank, feeling terrible." Then he said the sentence that got copied into 4 broadsheets inside a fortnight. He said, "I want an ending. I am asking for it out loud in front of you all so that nobody has to guess later what I wanted." And then he said, "And I would like it to be mine. Not the choir's and not the crown's. Mine. If somebody arranges it for me while I am asleep, I will have been thrown away twice." Prior Kane was standing an arm's length from him when he said that. And Kane's face did not change, and I have thought about that a great deal since. Kane made his case on the 6th day, and he made it against me, and he did not know it, and everything in it was accurate. He stood on the steps with Osk's book under his arm, and he did not raise his voice. He said, "There is a man in this country who removed the ending from the world with an instrument nobody else has, and I do not know his name." He said, "I am not going to speculate about what kind of man he is. Let me talk about what has been done since, by good people, in his shadow, because that is the part we can all see." Then he said, "In October, on the road out of this town, 20 living creatures were driven into a flooded chamber and buried under 400 tons of stone, alive, and last month the chamber was filled in on top of them. 19. It was 19, and I had counted them myself through Bram's glass, and I stood in that square and corrected the number in my own head, and it did not help me by the width of a hair." He said, "I am told this was well done. I am told it opened the road, and I believe that. I am asking you to notice what the best mind in this county produced when it was given a problem it could not finish." He said, "It put the suffering somewhere it could not be seen, and then it put stone on top of it, and then everybody went home and had their supper. That is not wickedness. That is what everybody will do, everywhere forever, unless we make an ending again." Nobody in that square argued with him. I did not argue with him. There is no argument. He had described my autumn accurately and in order, and he had left nothing out. Then he made the offer, and it was public because the choir did not know who to make it to. He said, "If the man who holds that seat is within the sound of any voice in this kingdom, here are my terms, and I will hold to them in front of witnesses. Come forward, not to a court, to us. The choir will take the burden of the yards, all of it. Every parish, every cradle, every ounce. And the man who did it may go and be nobody in a town where nothing is known about him." He said, "I do not want him punished. I want him where he can be asked questions. That is all I have ever wanted, and it is the only thing I have never been able to buy." I stood at the back of that square with my hood up, next to a woman I had rigged a cradle for in September, and I did the arithmetic on the offer, and it was a good offer, and it was honest, and I have no reason at all to believe he would have broken it. I asked him one question that evening, in a queue of people who wanted to ask him things, with my hood up and my hands in my sleeves. I said, "Why do you think it went to him? Whoever he is. Out of everybody." Kane looked at me a moment longer than he needed to and said, "I have no idea, and I have stopped finding it interesting." He said, "People want the answer to be about him. It is the last comfortable thought anybody has left. If he was chosen, then somebody chose, and if somebody chose, then somebody is minding us." Then he said, "I do not believe anybody is minding us, and I would rather spend what I have left on the ones in that square than on the question you have just asked me. Next. What stopped me was not courage. It was that I could not work out whether the choir could actually run that many cradles through the rest of a winter, and I decided, standing there, that they could not. I decided that on my own, in about 90 seconds, about a thing that was not mine to decide, and if you want to know what is wrong with me, the answer is that I have never once thought that sentence at the time. Rel Danner came 4 days later. He is from Ostley. He had a wife and 2 sons and a mill. And the mill loft came in during the 2nd week, and he has all 3 of them at home on boards, and he has been turning them since August, and he came to Draywall with a list. The list was everybody who had been on the Draywall shift on the day the letters came, and he had got it off the parish clerk, and it was not hard to get, because it is a public record. He worked down it in order. Nobody ever tells that part properly. He was not raving. He had been asking people questions for a week, politely, in the alehouse, one at a time. And the name the whole county had put at the top of any list about Draywall since the first afternoon was Kettle Vance. 40 years of powder, a charge in the hole that never fired, 41 men off a gallery, and a town that needed a reason inside 2 hours. I told them in September that the charge was still in the hole. I did not say it that day. Danner got him outside the alehouse on a Tuesday with about 30 people watching. He asked Kettle whether he had a gray window with a button on it, and Kettle said what, and Danner hit him. Kettle Vance is 62. He went down on the cobbles, and Danner got on top of him and kept going. And the 30 people did the thing that 30 people do, which is take 4 seconds too long. Nobody died. Nobody could. That is the whole horror of watching a fight now. It goes on until somebody decides to stop it, and the arithmetic that used to stop it is not there. I was across the square. I got about 6 feet and I opened my mouth, and what was going to come out of it was that it was me. I know that because I had the sentence ready. I had been carrying it since the 6th day, and it was 3 words long, and it was already in my mouth. Mira stopped it, and she did it in public. And she had had somebody carry her board and her cradle out to the edge of that square that morning, which I found out afterwards she had arranged the night before. She did not shout at Danner. She said, "Rel Danner," and he stopped, because she is the most looked at person in that county and everybody knows her name. Then she said, "Come here and look at me." And he got off Kettle Vance and came over, because he had been asking questions for a week, and here was somebody offering to answer one. She said, "You want the man who did this?" He said yes. She said, "So does everybody in this square, and half of them are lying about why." Then she said it, flat, without moving anything but her mouth, to a square of about 200 people. She said, "I am the one it was done for. Whoever he is and whatever he was thinking, the shape of it was that a person decided, in a few seconds, without asking me, what I was going to be able to carry." She said, "And now the prior of the hollow choir would like to decide, at more leisure and with better handwriting, the same thing. And you would like to decide it with your fists. And none of you have asked me either." She said, "I have been awake for 141 days. I have not asked for an ending yet. And when I do, I will ask out loud, in front of witnesses, and I will sign whatever there is to sign myself." Then she said, "Until then, get off Kettle Vance, and take your hands off my county." Nobody answered it. There is no answer to it. Kane was standing at the cross and he did not move, and Osk had his book open and stopped writing. Rel Danner stood there for a while, and then he said, "And what am I supposed to tell my boys?" And Mira said, "Tell them you found the person it was done for, and she was not on your list." He went home the next day. He did not apologize to Kettle Vance, and Kettle never asked him to. I got Kettle up. He had a broken cheekbone and 3 fingers wrong on the hand he loads with, and Ilse set them that night, and he asked her a question I heard from the doorway. He said, "Will they be right?" She said, "For powder work, probably not." He said, "All right," and then he did not say anything else. And I stood in that doorway with 3 words still in my mouth, and I did not say them then either. Mira told me what she had done that night herself, before I could work it out and be grateful for the wrong reason. She said, "I had them carry me out this morning. I have been ready for 4 days." She said, "I did not know it would be Kettle, and I did not need to." I said, "You took it out of my hands." She said, "Yes." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because you were going to give yourself to a man with 61 cradles and no ice on the strength of a 90-second calculation, and you would have called it honesty, and it would have been the same thing you did to me in September." Then she said, "And now you know what it is like. Write that down somewhere because you will forget it." The choir left Draywall in the 2nd week of February with the 61 and about 90 of our people walking behind the carts, and they went south, and by the thaw there were choir rows in a dozen market squares. Osk's book had 2,400 400 names in it by spring. And somewhere in that fortnight, the thing that Caney had offered stopped being a proposal and started being a price. Because once a man in his position says publicly that he will pay anything for a name, that name is worth something to everybody in the kingdom who has one to sell. It took Ilse Rand 7 weeks and 1 afternoon to work out what I was, and she did it with a pencil and a card, the same way she works out everything else. She had been treating me since the nosebleed at the sluice. There was no cleverness in her getting the opportunity. I bled on her floor in January, and she wrote a card because she writes a card for everybody. She wrote that the bleeding started behind the nose and not in it, that there was no blow and no fever, and that a rigger of 19 had lost 90 minutes of a working day and could not account for them. She had 206 cards in that box and 4 notes on me by February, and the 4 notes had a shape. She told me the shape afterwards, standing up, in the storeroom, in about 90 seconds, because she does not soften a finding by taking longer over it. She said, "Your amnesia is not organic. It does not fade at the edges, and it is not global. It arrives in steps, each step is one item, and the item is complete and clean-edged." She said, "That is not how a head works. A head that is injured loses a region. You are losing a list." She said, "And every step of it I can date, because Nim writes them on a slate, and Nim is 11 and does not think to hide anything from a physician." Then she said, "And every date is within an hour of you having produced a piece of exact wording that nobody in this county could have given you." She listed them: the cradle in September, the sluice in October, when I came off that bank knowing what seats a gate, the wall rings in the rain, and the sluice again in January, with a figure in hundredweight that Kettle Vance checked 3 times and could not fault. She said, "I have been wrong about worse than this, and I would rather be wrong now. So I tested it once, and I will tell you that I did it because you are going to work it out, and I would rather you had it from me." The test was the store's lock. Somebody put a wedge in it in the last week of January, and Ilse asked me to open it, because the opium was behind it, and there were 4 names on her slate that night. I put my hands on the shackle, stood there a minute, and told her it holds at the heel and not at the pins, and to take it off with a bar under the heel. It came off in 6 seconds. Before she asked me, she had made me say 4 things and written them down. My father's 2 trades, the rope carter's name, the order of the shift list, the road to Ostley. 2 hours later, she asked the same 4. 3 came back the same, and the carter's name had been gone since September, so it proved nothing, and she said so, and said the test was weak, and she knew it. She said it was suggestive and it was not proof, and I was not going to act on it. And then you did what you did in this room 4 minutes ago, and now it is proof, because I had put my hand on her wrist. I have to write that part out properly, because everything I have said about other people deciding for me is worth nothing if I skip it. She had just told me she had tested me without telling me. I was in a storeroom with my back against a shelf, and I wanted to know what she was going to do, and I could not ask, because she would have told me the truth, and I did not trust it. So I took her wrist, the way you take a wrist to feel a pulse, and I held it, and I stood still. She let me. She thought I was steadying myself, and she is a physician, and steadying is a thing she allows. Physician of the chapter, sworn, bound while the chapter stands. The oath obliges the reduction of suffering by the means available to the swearer, and does not oblige the preservation of the sufferer. That was all. 1 entry, 1 layer. It told me what her oath says, which any chapter physician would have read me off a wall, and it told me nothing about what Ilse Rand was going to do next. Then the window did the rest of it in front of her. Debit applied. 1 item has been removed from your recall. Removed. Every conversation you have had with Dr. Ilse Rand. She read it over my shoulder. She had to lean to do it, and she did lean, and then she straightened up and said, "Oh." I knew who she was. I knew her name, her trade, her register, the slate at the head of the row, the 11 ounces, the 4 names a night. All of that is fact, and facts stay. What is gone is every time she has ever spoken to me. 5 months of a woman I saw daily. I do not know why I trusted her. I know that I did, because I behaved as if I did, and I cannot get at one single reason. And she watched me find that out, standing 3 feet away, and she said, "That is the 4th thing on my card, and it is the one I did not have. Thank you." Then she said, "I want you to notice that I asked and you took." I said, "I know." She said, "No, I want it said in this room, because in a day you are going to be angry with me, and I would like the record straight first." She said, "I tested you and told you inside the week. You did that to me, and I only found out because your own service invoiced you for it in front of me. I have never done it to anybody since, not once, and not when it would have saved a great deal. And that is the only rule I have kept perfectly for a year." She told me what she was going to do about 2 hours later, at the yard gate, in daylight, with Tovin standing there. She said, "I am going to give your name to the Northern Army." I stood there without answering. Tovin said, Ilsa. She said, let me finish, because I have thought about it for 2 days and I will not enjoy saying it twice. She said, 2 people in this kingdom will come for these cradles this year. It is the choir or it is Vold. There is no third answer, and there is not going to be one. She said if Cain gets them, he will collect them into squares and keep them warm and use them. And inside a year, he will be gathering their marks on a paper because he cannot bear to wait and he thinks intent is enough. She said if the army gets them, they will be counted, fed, and put in a cold cavern with a roof. And I will still hold the opium because a marshal wants an inventory and a prior wants a movement. Then she said, and there is a third thing. Vold thinks the man with the seat can spend it again, and that is worth more to us than anything in the fish cellar. While he thinks it, he will not burn this yard. I said, and when he finds out I cannot. She said, then he will have no reason to hold you, and you will be released, and I will have got a garrison onto this ground at the price of 1 apprentice being frightened for a fortnight. I have priced worse trades this winter, and so have you. I said, you are trading a person. She said, yes, I am aware. I am aware of it in a way you will not be able to insult me about, because I have been doing it out loud with 11 ounces every night since September while you were rigging cradles. Tovin said, do not do this. She said, I am doing it this afternoon, and I am telling you both to your faces first, which is more than either of you gave me over the ice. That last part was for me, and it landed exactly where she aimed it. Margit Sol sold me the warning 5 days before it came, and she was scrupulous about what she was selling. She said, I have 4 facts and 1 guess, and I priced them separately. 12 hulls taken up at the head of the cut. Carts hired in 3 parishes above rate. Fell Harrow Cavern cleared of private stock. A marshal's escort passed Osley on Tuesday. She said, the guess is that they are coming here. And the guess is free, because I bought the facts from a man I would not vouch for, and you should know that before you act on them. I acted on them. It was not a mistake. It was the second best move on a board with no good one. I put the cold, the stores, and Osk's copy of the register into a convoy. 9 carts, 4,100 weight of packed ice bought back off the northern road at a price that made Tovin sit down, and the register in a box under the 4th seat. I did not move the people. You cannot move that many cradles in February, and Bram said so on the first evening, and I never argued with him about it. 3 days on the shoulder road to Red Warren, over the county line, then Jen Marrow to take all of it by water on the 4th day. Jen priced it and then did a thing she had never done, which was ask a question about the job. She said, is this a run or is this a flit? I said, what is the difference to you? She said, 3 marks and whether I load at night. I said, it is a flit. She said, thank you. That is all I wanted. Put the number up, loaded at night, and was at Red Warren on the day. None of it mattered. The convoy never got there. They took it on the open road on the 2nd afternoon, 14 miles out, on the flat between the 2 hills where a convoy can be seen for an hour before it arrives and cannot leave the road. Captain Low Hesk did it with about 90 men, perfectly, in 7 minutes, and nobody was hurt, because he set it up so that nobody had anywhere to go and everybody could see that. He came down the line himself and told the carters to sit down on the verge, and they sat down on the verge. I was on the 4th cart. I got about as far as standing up. He said, sit down, Mr. Arden. I said, we are carrying cold for 206 people at Draywall. He said, I know exactly what you are carrying, and where it was going, and who was to meet it, and I am sorry. I said, then let it through and take me. He said, that is not the offer, and you know it is not the offer. Then he said, and I will tell you the rest, because you will find it out in a fortnight anyway, and it will be worse then. The word that we were coming was put into the county on purpose. You were meant to move. I said, by whom? He said, by us. He said, a yard with 200 people in it, and a clerk's instrument on the gate cannot be taken in daylight without it being a story. A convoy on a road is 9 carts and no witnesses. He said, the marshal would rather have your stores than your building, and he has both now, because the building is no use without them. Then he said, I have said all of that out loud in front of my own men on purpose, and if you ever want to make trouble for me with it, that is your business. Bram was on the 2nd cart, and he had 10 of his crew with him, and Vold's warrant of conscription was read out on that road, and they were taken into the army's work service, where they stood. Bram did not fight it. He looked at 90 men on a flat road with a crew of 10, and he told them to put their tools down and go, and he said it in the voice he uses for sequencing, and they went. He came and stood by my cart afterwards and said, Do not say anything to me about that. I said I was not going to. He said you were going to say I was right. He said, I know I was right. If I put 10 men against 90 on that road, nobody dies, and they take them anyway, and 10 men go into the works with broken arms instead of whole ones. He said, I have been right about everything since August, and it has cost me a crew, so if you would kindly not. Vold walked into the draywall yard on the 4th day and found 206 people, a clerk's instrument, an empty stores room, and a fish cellar with nothing in it. He put the army's seal on the gate, not a lock. Wax and lead, a soldier at either post, and a notice saying the persons within were under Crown administration and enumerated. Tovin Ash's name is still on that instrument. Garrick had built it so well that not even the Northern Army could get around it, so they took everything the custodian needed and left him the title. Marshal Raskvold had me brought to him on the 5th day, in the tally shed, with the door open. He is 50, and not what people expect either. A countryman's face, listens with his head down, performs nothing at all. He said, you are the editor. I said, who told you? He said, that is not a question you get. Are you? I said yes. He said, thank you. Then he said, I am going to explain my position, because I would rather deal with a man who has understood me. Most of my difficulties this year have been with people who decided I was a villain and stopped listening. He said, this country ran on ending. A lease ends. A sentence ends. A regiment is discharged. A king is succeeded. A war stops because one side runs out. All of it is gone, and none of it has been replaced. He said, 26 years in the field, and I have never once seen an army stop for another reason. So there will be no more stopping, and the only thing left that holds a country together is one hand on it that does not let go. He said, I do not enjoy it. I had it read in every parish because I would rather be hated for a true thing than trusted for a false one. Then he said, and now you are going to delete a second rule for me, and I am going to tell you which one. I said I cannot. He said everybody says that first. I said I cannot, and I can prove it. And I would like to prove it in front of as many of your officers as you can fit in this shed, because I am only going to do this once. That surprised him. It is the only time I ever surprised him. He got 8 of them in. Lohesk, 2 majors, a commissary, the garrison clerk, and 3 others whose names I did not get. And there was something I had not known until that afternoon, which turned out to matter more than anything else in that shed. A public tier window cannot be shown to anybody. Everyone in the country had tried it in the first week. You cannot turn it, you cannot lend it, and 2 people standing nose to nose see nothing of each other's. Mine can be shown. I found that out standing in front of 8 officers because I had nothing else to try. I put my hand out and turned it the way you turn a slate, and the garrison clerk went white and stepped back into the man behind him. It is gray, and it has no border, and it does not belong to me, and I did not understand what that meant for another 10 months. It is not fitted to a person. It is a panel on a wall that happens to be following me around. They read it, all 8 of them. Editor tier, access granted. Your seat is provisional, pending nothing. Delete rule, 0 of 1. Known issues, 2. We are aware of reduced service in some areas. Thank you for your patience. The commissary asked whether it could be a forgery. Lohesk said, of what? Vold looked at it for a long time. Then he said one word, which was 0. And then he sat down on the tally clerk's stool and put his hands on his knees. He said, so you spent it in the first hour. I said, in the first afternoon. He said, on what? I said, on one person. And I named her, and I said that the index had matched my input to its own nearest entry without asking me, and removed that instead. He said, and it did not show you the match first. I said no. He said, of course it did not. And he laughed once, with no pleasure in it at all, and said, I have spent 5 months making dispositions around a threat that expired in August. Then he did the thing that ruined me in about 90 seconds, without any malice, because it was the correct move. He told the 8 officers they were dismissed, and that nothing said in the shed was under seal. That was all. He did not issue anything, and did not need to. A garrison clerk with a story like that is a fortnight from every alehouse between here and the capital. It took 12 days. Then he released me in the square, in front of the yard gate, with the seal behind him. He said, this is the man who did it. He cannot do it again, and I have satisfied myself of that with witnesses. I have no use for him, and neither has anybody else, and any man who touches him makes him worth something. Then he said, go home. I stood in that square, with about 100 people I had rigged cradles for looking at me, and the ones I remember are not the ones who shouted. Widow Sarn put her basket down and did not pick it up. Haldervane went back to the row. Ilse Ran was on the gate steps with her register under her arm, and she did not look away from me. and I have never been able to remember one word she said to me before that afternoon, and she knows it. By the end of that fortnight, everybody in Cairnvared knew my name, knew what I had done, and knew I could not do anything else ever again. Which meant the one thing I had traded on since August without once saying a word of it, that powerful people were afraid to touch a man who might spend a second one on them, was gone. I had a fortnight of it left before the country ran out of meat. By the end of February, there were 12,000 cattle standing in the water meadows below Red Warren, and every one of them was fat and healthy and eating, and nobody in Cairnvared could turn a single one of them into a dinner. Every farming country in the world calls that the hungry gap, and every one of them gets it. Last year's grain is finished, and this year's is a green shoot. And the 6 weeks in between are what the salting barrel and the winter beast were invented for. The winter beast is a bullock you keep alive on hay until the stores run out, and then you kill and you eat for a month. I do not need to explain what happened to that. Meanwhile, the herds had not stopped calving, because nothing about calving changed, and a herd that nobody culls in the autumn is a herd that is about a third bigger by spring and eats accordingly. 12,000 head below Red Warren, and about the same again on the Osley Flats, and the seed corn was in barns those animals could smell. I was nobody by then, and I will put my own position down briefly and then get out of the way, because this is not my part of the story, and pretending otherwise would be a lie. Vold had let me go in front of 100 people, and the tale took a fortnight to reach the capital. By the thaw, there were 2 broadsheets with my name in them, one of which had my trade wrong, and the choir had people asking after me in 3 counties. They never laid a hand on me. Cain's terms were public, and he kept them, and what came instead was a novice on a mule at the Draywall gate about every 10 days, asking politely whether I would come and answer questions, and going away again when I said no. I had no crew, no stores, no yard, no standing, and no seat. What I had was a rigger's ticket, and a great deal of unpopularity, and neither of those feeds anybody. The one thing that had not been taken was the fish. Fish do not breathe air. That is the whole of it. Whatever the index took out of the world, it took out of creatures that breathe, and a herring does not, and a herring accordingly still ends in a net, on a deck, in the ordinary way. You could stand on the Draywall wharf that spring and watch a woman gut 40 of them for the pot, dead and stiff and normal, while behind her in the meadow, 12,000 bullocks did not so much as have a bad afternoon, which made every hull in Cairnvared worth more than the cargo in it, and made Jen Marrow, who owns a dozen of them and a share in as many again, a national figure inside about 6 weeks. She did not become grand about it. She became worse. She had a second tally book made, a bigger one, with a hard cover, and she used to open it in front of people slowly. Rob and Etta Fisk came up the Draywall Road in the first week of March with about 1,000 head, and asked for the man who dropped the road into the gallery. They are drovers. Married 30 years, they walk stock for hire from the coast up to the northern fairs, and they had been walking the same 1,000 animals in circles since November, because there was nowhere to deliver them to. Etta Fisk did the talking. She said, "We have been paid to take these to Broken Mile, and there is no fair at Broken Mile, and there has not been one since the letters, and we have eaten our fee." I said, "Why come to me?" She said, "Because you are the only person we have heard of who moved a thing that could not be moved, and we have asked 10 people, and you are the 11th. I said, "I have no crew, no money, and no authority whatsoever, and half this county would like a word with me." Rob Fisk said, "We know all that." Etta said, "We have walked past your name on a broadsheet for a fortnight." Then she said, "Can you count?" I said yes. She said, "Then count these, because everybody we have asked has told us to move on, and not one of them has asked how much they eat." So I counted, which is the only useful thing I did that spring. 1,000 head at Winterkeep is about 12 pounds of dry fodder a day each. That is 6 tons a day. There is no 5.5 tons a day anywhere on that road in March, so they had been grazing, which meant eating the pasture that has to carry the lambing. I put it on a slate for them, and Etta Fisk looked at it and said, "So we are not a nuisance, we are a famine walking." I said, "You are about 10 days of a parish's grass." She said, "And there are how many of us?" I said, "On the roads in this county that I know of, 4 droves." She said, "So it is not us." Mira was at Fell Harrow by then, which is where I had to go, and it took me 4 days on foot because I had no horse. They had emptied every northern yard into one valley in January under the Army's administration, and I came over the shoulder of the road above it at about the 9th hour of the 4th day, and I stopped walking. I have stood in 3 doorways in my life and looked down a row of these. The first was Tovan's Guildhall, 7 cradles on a stone floor and a name chalked on a board. That was in August, and I could see all of it from where I stood. Fell Harrow is a valley. You cannot see the end of it. Rows and rows of cradles on trestles. Ice hauled down the northern road on sledges in a line that did not stop while I was watching, and a stake at the head of every cradle with a name board on it. I counted the boards along one row, and there were 240 in that row, and I counted rows until I lost the far ones in the light, and then I sat down on the bank for a while. The register at the gate said 11,106. Mira had the board, not a slate. A board 12 feet long and 4 high under a canvas lean at the head of the valley, with the parishes down one side and the days across the top, a boy on a ladder, and 12 strings of counters on nails. The army had put her on it in January because Vold's commissary walked the row on the second day, found a woman doing his job faster than he could, and did the sensible thing. She said, "Before you say anything, I know." I said, "I had not said anything." She said, "You had your face on." I said, "You are running the occupation's arithmetic." She said, "I am running the ice. Somebody is going to allocate it, and the choice is me or a commissary who has never seen an abdominal wound, and you of all people are not going to lecture me about who holds the slate." Then she said, "And I am not being thanked for it, and I do not want to be, so do not start." I said, "I have a drover on the Draywall Road with 1,000 head and 4 droves behind her." She said, "Good. Sit down, because that is the first useful sentence anybody has brought me this month." Margaret Saul had got there first, of course. She had been at Fell Harrow since the thaw with her tables and a clerk, and she had done the thing she had been waiting her whole professional life to do. She had taken her guild, whose entire business had been the probability of things ending, and turned it into the body that allocated things instead. She said to me, in the lean, with her roll open, "We know where every hull is. We know where every barn is. We have known that since before the letters because we insured all of it, and we are the only people in this kingdom who know it. And nobody has ever asked us for it before." She said, "I have been to the Crown, the chapter, the choir, and the army in 3 months, and every one of them wanted the data set, and none of them wanted us." Then she said, "So now we do not sell it. We allocate with it. We charge for the allocating, and my guild will be here in 10 years. She was completely right, and she was insufferable about it for about a month. The plan came out of the 3 of them in about 2 days, and I did not contribute 1 line of it. Margaret had the barns and the hulls. Mira had the arithmetic and the board. And the answer was that Cairn Verid had enough calories in it. It simply had them in the wrong places and in the wrong form. Grain south to north on water. Fish north to south on the same hulls on the return leg. Salted at the coast in the guild's own barrels. And the herds, which were eating the difference, off the good ground entirely. That was the plan. Grain and fish by water, cattle onto marginal upland, where they could stand about all summer doing no harm to anybody. Then, Jen Marrow named her price, and the plan changed shape in a morning. She came up to Fell Harrow herself, which she had never done for anybody, and she brought the big tally book, and she put it on Mira's trestle, and opened it in front of 4 people. Mira said, "We need 19 hulls for 5 weeks. Jen said, "No, you do not. You need 23. And you have not costed the return leg empty because you are thinking like a person who has never been paid by the ton." Mira said, "All right, 23. Jen said, "I have 12 and a share in 9. Then she itemized it out loud, and it took 6 minutes. And I have never enjoyed anything more in a year that had very little in it to enjoy. Hull hire by the week at the spring rate. Crews at double, because a crew that can be got at all in March is a crew somebody else wants. Lock fees at Toller Gray's gate, both ways, on every run. And Toller had trebled his, and she read that out in a particular voice. Barrel hire. Salt at the coast price, which was not the coast price anymore. Loss on the fish, a line for the tow horses. And then a line she called national interest, and Mira put her pencil down. Mira said, "What is national interest?" Jen said, "It means I am the only person who can do this, and I have decided not to pretend otherwise. And if you would prefer, I called it something else. I will call it something else, and the number will not move." Mira said, "That number is 1/5 of the whole allocation." Jen said, "Yes." Mira said, "You are aware that this is the food supply of a kingdom." Jen said, "I am extremely aware. It is why the number is what it is. I have been in this trade since I was 10, and this is the first month of it that anybody has asked me twice for anything." Then came the line that got repeated up and down the cut for a year. She said, "I will do exactly what is written on this page, on the day, in full, in weather, for anybody who pays it. I will not do one thing more. I have never once broken that, and you are buying it as much as you are buying the hulls." Mira paid. She argued for about an hour first and got the barrel line down and nothing else. And afterwards she said to me flatly that it was the best hour's work anybody did that spring and that she would have charged more. But it cost 4 hulls out of the plan, and 4 hulls out of the plan is what happened next. All of it. Because the herds were supposed to go south by water in the empty legs. That was the elegant part. Cattle down to the coast marshes on the returning hulls, 400 head a week, out of everybody's way, and onto ground that grows nothing anyway. With 4 fewer hulls, there was no empty leg to spare, and the arithmetic came out at 10 weeks instead of 5, and the seed corn was in the barns now. So the cattle had to walk, and the only ground you can walk 12,000 head onto in March without crossing sown fields is up. The transfer at Fell Harrow ran for 10 weeks, and it worked. And the reason it worked was Halder Vane, whom everybody had laughed at in September. Grain into a hull off a sledge line is a 4-hour shift in the cold. The army had crews, and the crews were fine. What could not be done was the ice line. It runs from the cavern mouth down to the valley and has to be worked by hand, because a sledge on that grade needs a man on the brake. A man on that brake has about 90 minutes in him before his hands stop being reliable, and Halder Vane can give a man another hour with a hand on his wrist and 30 seconds. He worked out a rotation himself. 8 brakemen and him walking the line, and he could carry 6 of them at once if he did not stop moving. He did not stop moving for 10 weeks, and he took nothing out of it except being spoken to properly at last. Now, the part that is mine, and it is 1 paragraph long, and it is the only thing I said that season. I said, do not put 12,000 head of meat on the upland. I said it at the trestle, in front of Mira and Margit and the Fisks and a commissary whose name I never got. And I said it twice, and I said why. I said, there is something living up there. Everybody in 3 counties has heard the stories off the drift road, and I have seen what comes down off it, because I put 19 of them under a hill in October. I said, it is up there, whatever it is, and it has been eating what it can find on a bare upland all winter, and you are about to walk 12,000 animals that cannot be killed onto it, and leave them standing there all summer. Etta Fisk asked the only question that mattered. She said, what do you want us to do instead? I had nothing to give her. 4 fewer hulls, and 10 weeks, and a barn full of seed corn, same as everybody else, and I stood in that lean and could not produce one single alternative. The commissary said, so it is a warning without an instruction. I said yes. Margit said, then I will write it in the margin of the allocation with your name on it, because that is what a margin is for, and she did, and it is still there in the guild's copy, and it did me no good at all. Rob Fisk said, we will take ours high. Etta said, we know that road, we have walked it. And if there is a thing up there, we shall spot it long before it spots 1,000 cows. They were not being brave, and they were not being stupid. They were being paid, and they had eaten their fee in November. And they made their own decision in front of everybody, and I have never once said a word against it. They took the drove up the drift road on the 14th of March, and the other 3 droves followed, inside a fortnight. And by the first week of April, there were 12,000 head on the upland. Nobody starved in Cairnvared that spring. That is the finished result, and it should be stated plainly, because it is the largest good thing that happened in that year, and I had nothing whatsoever to do with it. The Granary Manifest for the 11th week has 14 counties on it, and a total in quarters at the bottom, and Margit Soul had it copied and posted at every lock on the cut, and people used to stand and read it. In Draywall, on the last Sunday in March, the fish came up on Jen Marrow's hulls, and the bread came out of the parish oven on the same afternoon, and I stood in the square and watched a town eat. And a week later, a shepherd off the drift road came into Lobeck at a run and said that something had come down onto the summer pasture in the night and taken about 40 head, and that it had not eaten them, and that they were all still standing up. I saw it for the first time on the 12th of April from the Lobeck shoulder at about 1.5 miles, and the first thing I did was take out my slate and try to price it, because that is what I do instead of being frightened. It is about the size of the Draywall Spoil Hill, 200 yards across the base, 60 or 70 high at the shoulder, and it moves at something under 1 mile a day, which sounds like nothing until you work out that it never stops. It is made of what it has taken. Nobody believes that part from a description, and everybody understands in about 4 seconds from 1.5 miles away. There were 40 of the Fisk's bullocks in the front of it that morning. Not eaten. In it. Standing at angles, up to the chest and the shoulder and whatever the mass is, moving with it, and every one of them still alive. because everything is still alive. You can see them from a mile and a half because a bullock is white and brown, and the rest of it is not, and that is how everybody who has ever seen it describes it. I did not get the slate finished. Cephaloon came up the shoulder behind me at about the 9th hour, and I had not seen her since March, and she said, "Good, you are here. I was going to have to find you." She had been the only person in the county who did not stop speaking to me after the tally shed. She came up to Draywall 4 days after Vold let me go, sat on the wall of the ore yard and said, "So you did it?" I said yes. She said, "Well, that explains a great deal about you." Since the autumn, she had been doing what she does, which is going to things alone and finishing them up and down the drift road, and it had worked every time, and every time it made the road slightly worse. She said, "I have been up to it twice this week." I said, "And?" She said, "And I have been standing on a hill looking at it for 2 days, working out where to hit it. And then I remembered you told me not to, and I came to find you instead. That is progress." I said, "Do not hit it." She said, "Why not?" I said, "Because it is going down the Ashmore line, which has 5 houses on it and a sheepfold, and if you make it change its mind, it will change it towards something, and there is only one something on that side." She said, "Lobeck." I said, "Lobeck. 409 people." She said, "All right." And she meant it, and she went back to the fold that night, and then at about the 4th hour of the morning, it came through the fold wall and took the flock. Not eaten, taken. 61 ewes in lamb into the front of it, and it went on at its mile a day with them in it, bleeding, and it was still bleeding 4 days later when the wind was right. She went at it at first light, and I do not blame her for it, and I have never once said that I do. I watched all of it from the shoulder, with Kettle Vance beside me, and a glass we passed back and forth, and it was the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen a person do, and I include everything that happened at the end of that year. She went up the flank of it, on foot. She went about 40 feet up the face of a moving hill, made of things that are still alive, and she opened it from the shoulder down to the base in one line, and about a quarter of the front of it came off and went down the slope. The flock came out with it. That was the intention, and it worked. 61 ewes, most of them ruined, all of them out, and the drovers had them off the hill inside an hour. And then the whole mass turned about 20 degrees to the west and started going the other way. Kettle Vance said, "That is Lobeck," and put the glass down and did not pick it up again. It is not clever. I have had to explain that to about 400 people since, and nobody ever likes it. It has no plan, and it does not think, and it is not angry with anybody. It goes where the heat and the noise are, and it does not go back to a place where something has hurt it. That is the whole of its behavior. It is enough. A thing that follows heat and noise in a country full of people is a thing that will always be coming toward a village. Sifa got back up the shoulder at about the 11th hour, with her arms open from wrist to elbow, and did not sit down. She said, "Say it." I said that she did not need me to. She said, "Say it. Because if you do not say it, I will have to, and I will get it wrong and be kinder to myself than you would be." So I said it. I said, "You took a mass that was going toward a sheepfold and made it go toward 400 people. And the reason you did it is that you are the only person in this kingdom who can do anything at all to it. And that is now the most dangerous fact in the county." She said, "That is twice." I said, "What?" She said, "The road. In the autumn. 9 of them into 20. That is twice. And both times I was the fastest thing available. And both times it would have been better if I had been in bed." Then she said, "I do not know how to be in a story where the answer is not me hitting it. And that is not a joke. I genuinely do not know how to be in one." I said, "Then hold something." She said, "Hold what?" I said, "I do not know yet." She stayed. She has never once left when it would have been reasonable to. What we had was this, and I am setting it out the way I set it out on the slate that night in the Lobeck alehouse, because I have never had a problem I could state more cleanly or solve less. It cannot be killed. It cannot be stopped by anything that would have stopped anything. It weighs, at my estimate, something over 11,000 tons, and I would not stand behind that number in front of Margate Saul. It goes toward heat and noise. It will not go back where it has been hurt. And in April, on thawed upland, it cannot cross soft ground, because 11,000 tons on peat goes in and stays in, and it does come out again, 4 days later, half a mile along, which means it is on the firm lines. The old drove roads and the gravel ridges. In that whole country, there are 3, and they all come down into the Lobeck Bowl, and one of them goes past the mouth of the old fell. The fell used to run out of that bowl before the canal cut across it in my grandfather's time. There is a dry bed 14 miles long, 60 feet deep at the head, with rock walls, going nowhere, holding nothing, and it has been empty since before I was born. I put my hand on the ridge stone, out of habit, and got nothing. Because a ridge is a ridge, and the index has never had a word to say about a hill that walked out of the sky. What it had was the number, which still read 2, and under it the line it had been showing since August, about reduced service in some areas, and its thanks for my patience. I have argued with that line out loud, on a hillside alone, more than once, and it has never once argued back. A dry riverbed is not a prison. It has 2 ends, but it is 14 miles of hard walking in the wrong direction. And it will not make a mile a day in there, because a thing that shape moves at the pace its front can spread. Between rock walls, its front is 40 yards across instead of 200. I priced it at a quarter of its open ground pace, which is a season, and a season was what I needed and all I could think of to want. To get it into the bed, I needed to close the Lobeck line and open the Fell line, and that meant fire and noise down 14 miles of bed, and a slope shot off the ridge shoulder, so the firm route to Lobeck stopped being firm. Fire and noise down 14 miles of anything is 200 men for 3 days. I had none. Bram had 5 crews, and every one of them was in the Army's works service at Fell Harrow with a warrant on them, and I went to him first because he is the first person you go to. He said no before I finished. Then he said, "Ask me the second question." I said, "What is the second question?" He said, "The one where you ask me for the sequence instead of the men, because that is the one you came for, and you have been standing there working out how to make it sound like something else." I said, "All right, give me the sequence." He said, "No." Then he stood there for about a minute with his arms folded, and then he gave it to me, out loud, from memory, in 7 steps, and I wrote it on a slate against the wall of an army stores shed with a soldier 40 feet away. He said, "That is not help. Understand what I am doing. I have given a plan to a man who is going to use my crews without me, and if that goes wrong, I have neither stopped it nor been there." He said, "I have spent my whole life not being that man." Then he said, "Go on," and went back inside. Captain Lohesk was at Fell Harrow with the works service under his hand, and I went to him with nothing to offer him at all, which is the only honest way I have ever negotiated with anybody. I said, "I need 200 men for 3 days, and I have no money, no authority, and no way to make it worth your while." He said no. I said, "I know." He said, "Do you want the reasons, or shall we skip them?" I said, "Skip them." Then he sat down and said, "All right. What I have instead is this, and it is not what you asked for, and you are going to have to build with it." He said, "My standing orders are to keep the work service concentrated at Fell Harrow and to maintain the Northern Road. The Northern Road includes the shoulder track above Lobeck. It has needed brushing out since the thaw, and I have been meaning to see to it." He said, "Brushing out 4 miles of track is 200 men, and 3 days and a great deal of cut brush that has to be burned where it is felled, because you cannot cart it." He said, "I would put them on that on Tuesday. I would move them along the track in the order the track runs, which is from the ridge shoulder down toward the head of the old fell." He said, "And if there were fires burning along 4 miles of that line for 3 days, that is a brushing crew doing its job, and I would not be able to prevent it, and neither would anybody else." I said, "That is disobedience with extra steps." He said, "No. Disobedience is when you do not do it. I am going to do all of it, in order, on the day, to the letter, and slowly, and I will do it at the wrong end of the county for anybody's convenience but mine." Then he said, "And you should know that I have thought about it, and it will cost me my command. And I have decided that it is worth my command, and I would rather you did not thank me, because that would make it a favor, and it is not one." Kettle Vance walked the ridge shoulder for 2 days before he would say anything, and on the second evening he came down and said the plan was wrong. He said, "You want the shoulder off so the firm line to Lobeck stops being firm. Fine, but you have drawn it coming off in one face, and it will not, because that ridge is bedded on the dip, and it will slab." I said, "So it slabs." He said, "So it slabs into the Lobeck bowl instead of across the line, and then you have a new firm apron pointing where you do not want it, and you have built that thing a road." I said, "Then what?" He said, 3 lifts, on the strike, working back. It takes 2 days instead of 1, and it puts that shoulder down in rubble on the wrong side of the line where nothing can walk on it." He said, "And I want the shot fired before the fires are lit and not after, because I am not lighting powder on a hill with 200 men and a burning brush line on it. And if that is inconvenient, you may go and find another powder man." There is not another powder man. He knows it. He says it anyway every single time. And it is not a threat. It is his way of making sure the plan is on paper before he touches it. He said one other thing on that ridge, on the second evening, with his 3 fingers still crooked from the square. He said, "This is the second plan of yours I have been allowed to finish, and I am beginning to think you are worth the trouble. Do not tell anybody I said that." We ran it from the 6th to the 11th of May. Kettle put the shoulder down in 3 lifts over 2 days, and it went as he said, in rubble, on the wrong side, and the ridgeline to Lobeck stopped being a line and became a slope of loose stone that nothing 11,000 tons heavy can climb. Lohesk's brushing crews started at the shoulder on the Tuesday and worked down toward the fellhead over 3 days, and they burned the cut brush where they felled it, in a line, as regulations require. 200 men making noise and smoke along 4 miles of track, moving away from a village and toward the mouth of a dry riverbed. Sifa did the last 2 miles, not by hitting anything. She stood at the head of the bed with a drum and a fire and made a great deal of noise for 10 hours, alone, on purpose, in the exact place we wanted it to come. She said afterwards that it was the worst thing she had ever done, standing still on purpose in front of it, and that she would rather have gone up the flank of it 4 more times. It came down off the ridge onto the fell line on the 9th of May at about the 4th hour and went into the mouth of the old bed, and by the 11th it was 2 miles down it between rock walls with nowhere to go but along. Lobeck is still standing. 409 people, 61 houses, and the church whose bells Orla counted in January from underneath the ice. The man who went out flat along that ladder for her is a cowman called Sim Wardle. He stood on the shoulder road and watched a hill walk away from his fields, asked me whether it was coming back, and when I said not by this road, he went to milk. Nothing came off me for it. No debit, nobody maimed on that ridge. Kettle allowed to finish what he started, and Lohesk had priced his own share out loud before he moved a man and told me not to carry it. So I stood there and let it be a good day. Margitsol's clerk walked all 14 miles behind it with a chain and put the firm lines of that upland on paper for the first time. And that map mattered later more than anything else we did that spring. Lohesk was relieved of his command on the 19th of May, not for the brushing. They could not touch him for that. He had done it correctly and filed it correctly, and Garrick Pell later told me it was the best piece of work of that kind he had ever seen out of a soldier. They relieved him for the pace of it. 200 men, 3 days, 4 miles, when the standing rate is 2 miles a day. He was found to have been dilatory in the execution of a lawful order, which is true, and he did not contest it. He came through Drewal on foot in June on his way south with a bag and no escort, and he would not come in, and he said one thing at the gate, which was, "Tell me if it works." The thing came out of the far end of the old fell in the 2nd week of July, 14 miles on and 9 weeks later, exactly as I had priced it. And then it came back down the upland toward the valleys, and it did not go anywhere near the Lobeck Ridge, and it did not go anywhere near the mouth of the fell. It went round. It has never taken either of those lines again, and everything we do to it from now on has to be a thing we have never done before. We could move it. We had proved that much and paid for the proof. We had no way on earth to keep it anywhere, and everything that could have held it, every crane, every crew, every guild hand, every ounce of cold, and the register that says who they all are, was behind a wax and lead seal on a gate in Drewal. This is the part I have put off writing for a year, and the reason it took a year is that there is no version of it where the fault is anywhere but with me, and I kept looking for one. By the end of May, the thing was 5 miles down the old fell bed with one open end in front of it, and every week of that was a week I had bought and not earned. Holding it anywhere at all needed 3 things, and all 3 of them were behind a wax and lead seal on a gate I had helped to build. We needed the cold, not for the operation, for the people. The Drewal cellars had been restocked in April and were sitting full behind a seal with a dozen soldiers on it. We needed Ilsa's stores, which is a way of saying the opium, because there is no way to hold anything anywhere without a physician, and no physician works without it. And we needed the register. There are 2 of them, and we needed both, and they were in the same room because the army had put them there. Brother Osk's book is the hours, name, parish, injury, hours since. 4,100 names by the spring, kept in a novice's bad handwriting since the 2nd week of the autumn, and it is the only honest instrument in Cairn Vered. The army took it off him on the day they sealed the works, because an occupying administration wants every list in the county in one drawer, and they never gave it back, and he had been counting from memory in a notebook ever since. The other is the army's own. Vold's commissary compiled it over the winter, and it has a column that Osk's does not, which is the holder, who has custody of each person, parish, family, guild, or house. 1,140 of those entries say House Varon. Osk came to me in Drewal in the last week of May and sat in the ore yard and said, "I have lost 400 hours. He said, "I cannot hold 4,000 names in my head at once, and I have been trying since February, and it is going." I said, "We will get the book." He said, "Do not say that unless you mean it, Because I have had it said to me by a prior, a magistrate, and a captain, and I would rather nobody said it again. I said, we will get the book. The way in that is not a gate as a drainage level under the town, and I knew it was there because every rigger in Draywall knows it is there, and nobody has been down it since I was born. It was driven 140 years ago to take water off the old workings. It runs from a portal in the terrace slope, under the ore yard, under the lane, and comes up in the burial guild's fish cellar, which is where the ice is and why that guild has the coldest cellar in the county. Nobody in the garrison knew it existed. It is not on the county plan. The only reason I know its line is that Bram made me walk it with chalk in my second year to learn what a dead level does to a hill. From the level there were two ways up into the works. The first is the west vent, a rise, about 11 inches by 14, cut for air, coming out through the floor of the stores room where Ilsa keeps her chest. Nim went into it 4 times on the day of the collapse, and it is the reason she is alive to be written about at all. The second is the level itself, all the way through to the cellar hatch. It is 4 feet high for most of it and 2 feet 9 at the neck under the lane, and a grown man can do it on his belly if he is not proud. What I knew and when is the load-bearing part, because everything after this follows from it, and I will not arrange it to look better. I knew the vent came out inside the stores. I knew a child could go up it in about 3 minutes and be standing on Ilsa's chest. And I knew that the vent has one end. If the garrison came into that stores room while she was in the rise, there is nowhere to go. Not a bad place. No place. 11 inches by 14, 40 feet of it, and a soldier at the bottom. So I decided that she was not going up the vent, and then I did the thing. I did not tell her the vent was there. I did not tell her I had decided anything. I went to Kettle Vance, and I asked him to bring down the west rise from the terrace side. And I gave him a reason. And the reason was structural, and it was true. And it was not why. I said, the rise runs under the corner of the guild hall footing, and if we are going to be working a level under that building, I want the void out of the equation. He said, that is sound. He said, how far down do you want it? I said, all of it. He shot it on the 29th of May in the afternoon, with 2 charges, and it took him about an hour, and he did it well, and he asked me twice whether I wanted it, and I said yes twice. Then I walked back into the ore yard, and stood in front of Nim and Bram and Sefa and Osk, and laid out a plan with 1 route in it, and I did not lie once. And every single person in that yard was working from a list I had shortened without telling them. Neem argued about her position in the order, and she was right about it. I had put her second, behind a holder called Fen Ridley, who is small for a man and knows the guild cellars. She said, no, I go first. I said, why? She said, because the neck under the lane is 2 feet 9, and Fen is not going through it in a hurry. And if there is anything wrong on the far side of it, I want to know before 4 people are lying down in a pipe behind me. Bram said, she is right. I said, I know she is right. She said, and give me the chest and the hatch. And Fen takes the cellar and the ice. And Osk stands at the portal, because if it goes wrong, the book has to leave the hill with somebody who is not underground. That is an 11-year-old sequencing an operation in front of Bram Cole, and Bram wrote it on his slate in her order and did not change a line of it, and I have kept that slate. We went in at the 2nd hour of the morning of the 2nd of June, 5 of us, with Sifa on the terrace slope above the portal, because she can put her hands on 100 weight of stone and hold it, and nobody else can. It went perfectly. That should be recorded before the rest, because it is true, and because everybody afterwards talked about the flood as though the plan had failed, and it had not. Nim did the neck in about 90 seconds and called back that the far side was dry and open. Fen came through, then me, then a holder called Addie Vance, who is Kettle's niece. The cellar hatch was bolted from the top. Nim went up the ladder and took the bolts out with a chisel and a rag round the head, one at a time, over 20 minutes, with a sentry 20 feet away through a wall. We had Ilsa's chest, Osk's book, the army register, and 12 boxes of the cold on the cellar floor in under an hour. The books went out first. That was Nim's order, not mine, and she said it out loud on the cellar floor. Books first, then the chest, then the cold, because the cold is heavy, and the books are the reason we came. The gap is a grating at the foot of the hall's north wall, where the old level breathes, 11 inches wide, coming out in the lane behind a rainwater butt. Osk lay on the far side of it with his arm through to the shoulder. She put Osk's book into Osk's hand through an 11-inch gap in a wall at about the 4th hour of the morning, and then the army register, and then Ilsa's chest by the handle, and he took all 3, and he ran, and that is the receipt. The garrison opened the sluice at 9 minutes past 4. Not because they had found us. They found the hatch bolts on the cellar floor at the change of the watch, worked out in about a minute that there was a way under the building, and did the correct and standard thing, which is to put water into a level and let it come out at the portal with whoever is in it. There is a sluice on the old workings above the terrace, cut for that purpose, and a sergeant whose name I never learned opened it in 4 seconds. I heard it before I understood it. Water in a dead level does not roar. It hisses a long way off, and then the air changes and you know what is coming through the neck before you hear it. 4 of us were on the cellar side of the neck. Nim was on the portal side because she had gone back through to be at the front of the line coming out, in the order she had written on Bram's slate. That is the sentence. That is all of it. She was in the correct place, at the correct time, doing the thing she had planned in front of 6 people. The neck under the lane is 2 feet 9, and it is the low point of the whole level. Water fills a low point first. It had about 7 minutes. We got Fen and Addie up the ladder and out through the hall while the garrison were all at the portal, and that is the only luck anybody had that night. Bram was on the terrace above the portal with Kettle and Sepha, and he could see the water at the mouth, and he could hear Nim on the far side of the neck, because she was shouting without stopping, and what she was shouting was the level of the water against the roof. She counted it for them. 4 inches, 9, 16, in a voice that did not change, from an 11-year-old lying in a stone pipe in the dark, so that the men above her could work out how long they had. Bram had 2 choices, and he had both of them inside about 90 seconds, and I was not there. And I have had it from 4 people who were. He could leave the sluice running and go for the portal, 400 yards of flooded level uphill against the flow. Nobody comes out of that, and the water goes on rising until it takes the hall footings. Or he could drop the roof of the level at the neck, which stops the water dead at the low point, because a fall at the neck is a plug, and which puts 11 feet of draywall onto a stretch of pipe with a child in it. Sepha was on the anchor. She had a hand on the neck stone from the terrace side, and she could feel it working, and she was holding it, and she was the only person in the kingdom who could have held it, and she held it for 19 minutes. She could not reach her. She was 11 feet of solid ground away from a girl she could hear counting inches, and everything the index gave her, all of it, was worth nothing through 11 feet of rock. She has told me since that this was the 3rd time, and that the first 2 she could argue with. Bram gave the order in the voice he uses for sequencing, and he gave it to Kettle Vance, and I have had the words from 3 people who all had them the same way. He said, "Drop the neck. She is under it, and I know she is under it, and I am giving the order." Kettle said, "Say it again." Bram said it again. Kettle fired it at 21 minutes past 4. The water stopped, the level held, the hall stood. Fen Ridley and Addie Vance and I came out of a guild hall door into a lane at 4:30 in the morning with nothing in our hands, because everything we had gone for was already a mile up the road with Osk. It took 31 hours to cut her out. They came in from the terrace side down the line of the old rise, which is the shortest way to the neck from above. The shortest way was through the rise Kettle had brought down on the 29th of May on my instruction, and they had to take that out again by hand, because you cannot shoot toward a person. 9 hours of that was mine. I know exactly which 9, and I have never told anybody which, and Kettle worked out the arithmetic on it about 8 days later, and Bram never had to. She was conscious for all of it. There is an air pocket at the neck because a fall makes one, and she was in it, on her front, with the fall on her from the hip down and her left arm under the edge of it. She talked the whole time, not the way people talk when they are frightened. She asked questions. She asked whether the books got out, and Osk shouted down that they had, and she said good, and then asked what the water had done to the hall footing, because she had been listening to it. At about the 20th hour, she asked for her slate, and they got it, and she dictated 4 things onto it through a gap in the stone. One of them was the position of the neck fall, so that whoever came in from the terrace side would not put the second cut in the wrong place. Ilsa got to her at the 31st hour and made everybody stop and did not let them take the last of the stone off her for another 40 minutes, because you do not lift a load off a crushed pelvis in a hurry. The verdict was the pelvis in about 9 pieces, and the left hand, which had been under the edge of a slab in water for 31 hours and was not going to be a hand again. Ilsa said it to her directly, sitting on the terrace slope in the daylight, because that is what she does. She said, "You will not walk." She said, "Your left hand is finished, and I will take what I have to take and no more. And you are unreleased, and you know exactly what that means, because you have been carrying water to them since August." Nim said, "I know." Then she said, "Is Addie all right?" And Ilsa said yes, and Nim said good, and that is all she said about it that day. 2 days later, from a cradle in the ore yard, with Kettle Vance standing at the foot of it, she said the other thing. She said there was a vent. I said what? She said, on the west side, into the stores. I went up it 4 times in August. I have been thinking about it for 2 days, and it was there in May, and it is not there now, and Kettle brought it down on the 29th, and nobody put it on the plan. Kettle Vance turned round and looked at me. She said, I would still have chosen the level. Do not think I am saying I would not. The books had to come out at the grading, and you cannot pass a chest up a rise. But it was a root, and it was not on the slate, and somebody took it off. Then she said the thing that finished me, and she said it without any heat at all, because she is not a cruel child, and never was. She said, I am not angry that you thought it was too dangerous. You are probably right. I am angry that you decided it on your own and then let me plan around a hole. Kettle Vance did not say anything to me for 6 days, and then he said one sentence, which was, you gave me a structural reason, and I signed my name in a book against a structural reason, and it was not one. He said, I will still work for you. I want you to understand that I will still work for you because there is nobody else, and this is not the year to be proud. And then he went back to the terrace. Bram Cole has not spoken to me since the 2nd of June. He has taken instructions from me. He has given me sequences. He has stood next to me on 4 operations since, and he has not said one word to me that was not about work. I have never asked him to. He gave that order on the strength of the plan I put in front of him, and the plan had a hole in it that I made, and there is nothing he can say to me that would be true and bearable at the same time. We had the books. Osk had his hours back and was 400 behind in closing. Ilsa had her chest. There was cold on the road to Fell Harrow inside a week. And in the Army's register, in the holder column, in a clerk's fair hand, 4,111 entries said House Varon. Every one of them named an instrument. Every instrument had a counterpart lodged at a county, and Garrick Pell could now demand every single one of them by number. On the 14th of June, the lower gallery of the Ashcombe Furnace Works reached 160 degrees and stopped losing any heat at all, and there were 311 people standing in it. Heat leaves. That is a thing you do not think about because you have never once in your life had to. You open a door and it goes. And the reason it goes is that heat spreads out into whatever is next to it until there is no difference left. In the Ashcombe lower gallery, it stopped doing that in about an hour on a Tuesday morning. The first thing I did when I heard was look at the bottom of my own window, and it still read too. And I sat with that for most of a day before I understood it. Silt is fines that will not go to the bottom. Heat is warmth that will not go into what is beside it. Those are not 2 rules. That is 1 rule about a thing spreading out until there is no difference left, failing in 2 places half a year apart, which meant the number was honest, and I had been reading it wrong. It does not count places, it counts rules, and a rule that has already failed does not fail twice. The furnace men noticed first because the draft died. Then the gallery below started to climb, and it climbed all day, and it did not level off in the evening the way heat does, and by the Thursday, it was 160 and still going up. I got there on the Friday on Jen Marrow's hull with 12 tons of ice, because Osk's book had told us the Ashcombe cruise hours, and Margit Sol had told us what the works return said about the furnaces, and between the 2 of them, anybody could see what was coming. The stair down is 41 steps. At the 11th step, you cannot breathe properly. At the 22nd, the leather of your boot goes soft. Nobody had been below the 22nd step since Wednesday. 311 people, standing. Not screaming, most of them, because you do not scream for 3 days. You go quiet and you stay upright because lying down on that floor is worse. Kettle Vance walked the works with me for 3 hours and then told me what would work, and it was not what I had come with. I wanted to ventilate, cut the roof, put a shaft in, let it out. He said, let it out into what? He said, you have not understood your own problem. There is nothing for it to go into. You will cut a hole and it will sit there being a hole. I said, then we move the heat instead of the air. He said, now you are talking like a quarryman. Water moves heat because water is heavy and heat rides on mass. And there was a canal basin 20 feet from the works wall with 100,000 tons of water sitting in it doing nothing. Under the gallery floor, there is a dead level, driven for drainage in the old works and abandoned. Kettle's plan was to cut a relief from the basin into it, so the water sat under the floor and pulled the heat down through the stone instead of out through the air. He said, it will not cool the gallery. Do not think it will cool the gallery. It will cool the stair from underneath for about 7 hours, and that is all I can give you. I said, 7. He said, 7. And I want the plan for what you are doing with them before I put a charge in that wall. because if you get 300 people onto a cool stair and no further, you have built a queue in an oven. Jen Marrow gave me the answer to that, and she charged me for it in the same sentence, which I have come to find restful. She said, "You want them out. Out is a boat. I have 4 hulls at the basin, and I can have 7 by Sunday, and a hull holds 80 on the deck if they are lying down, and lying down is what these will be doing." I said, 7 hulls, 3 days. She said 7 hulls, 3 days, and I want the ice paid for separately because you are going to use all of it on the stair and none of it on the cargo, and I am not eating that. Then she said, "And put the barrows on the invoice." And I said, "What barrows?" And she said, "The barrows you have not thought about yet because you are going to carry 12 tons of ice down 41 steps in something." She was right. I had not thought about the barrows. There was one thing in the way of all of it, and it was not physics. Ashcombe is House Varen's, and the furnaces were still lit. Drawing a furnace is an 8-hour job. It needs the furnace men. The furnace men take orders from a works manager, and the works manager had a written instruction not to draw for anybody without an order from the holder of the works. I stood in that yard on the Friday evening and asked him to draw the furnaces, and he said no. And he was not being cruel either. He had 4,000 people's wages behind that instruction, and a signature on it, and he showed it to me. He said, "Bring me an order from the holder, and I will draw them in 8 hours. He said, "I have men down there. My sister's boy is on the 2nd stage. Bring me an order." Garrick Pell had been in Verdhold for a fortnight with the Army's register, demanding counterpart instruments by number, and he had 400 of them in a box, and he brought them up the cut on the Saturday. He said, "I have read everyone, and they are excellent, and I have found nothing, and I want you to look at one because you look at things differently, and I have run out." I took one off the top of the box. It was Cor Sarns from the parish of Halling, dated the 9th of October, and I sat down on a bollard at Ashcombe Basin with it flat between my hands and stayed there. I had read one of these in the autumn. I knew exactly what I was going to get, and I got it, and then it kept going, and it went past the conditions clause, and out the other side into a list I had never seen the shape of before. Instrument of custody, private, binds the person named while the instrument remains in force. Force is maintained by the consideration stated within it, unless the consideration lapses, in which case the binding lapses with it and not before. Not covered. This binding does not attach to the holder. It attaches to the works at which the person is held. It does not follow a name, a family, or a house. It follows the ground. I read it 3 times sitting on a bollard, and then I stood up and had to hold on to a mooring ring. Because I knew what Colvin Varen had done in October. Everybody on the cut knew. Margit Sol had printed the low works costing in the spring, 3 factoring houses had dropped his paper, and he had needed money by the autumn or he was finished. So he had done the correct and ordinary thing that any man in his position does. He took the works out of House Varen and vested them in 3 separate holdings, so that lenders could take security on the ground without touching his family, and pledged all 3 to a syndicate. He had moved the works, and the custody follows the ground. Garrick read the entry off my slate about 10 times, and then sat down on the cobbles in his good coat. He said, "Say it in law and not in wording." I said, "I cannot, that is your half." He said, "Then I will. Every person named in these instruments is in the custody of whoever holds the works, and he has not held the works since the 16th of October. 4,111 people have been in the custody of a syndicate of lenders for 8 months, and nobody has told the syndicate." Then he said, "And a syndicate cannot work a man because a syndicate has no works manager, no instruction, and no consideration stated." He said, "The consideration has been paid by House Varen, who are not the holder, into instruments that are not theirs." He looked up and said, "This is not a defect. This is a class of person with no lawful holder at all, and I am going to have to do something about that today." We did it in the Ashcombe Market Hall on the Monday, because that is where the guilds sit, and because Margit Sol said that if we were going to do it, we should do it where the money could watch. There were about 200 people in that hall. The Colliers Guild, the canal factors, 4 underwriters, the works manager, the syndicate's agent up from the capital with a clerk, and Colvin Varen in a good coat at the front with his hands behind his back. Garrick Pell stood up with a box of 400 instruments and read. He read the custody clause of the Cor Sarn instrument. Then he read the vesting deed of the 16th of October, in full, all 9 pages, and by the 4th page, the syndicate's agent had stopped writing and started listening. Then he read the 2 of them together, and he did it slowly, because he had waited his whole life for a room in which reading something slowly was the correct thing to do. He said, "The persons named in these 400 instruments, and in every other counterpart this county holds, are in the custody of the holder of the works. He said, the holder of the works is not House Varen and has not been since October, by the instrument of Colvin Varen's own hand, which he executed to protect his family from this class of liability, and which he executed extremely well. The syndicate's agent stood up and said, we do not hold those people. Garrick said, you do. You have since October. Margaret Soule then read out, from her own tables, what 4,000 unreleased persons cost to maintain per annum at the chapter's standard, and she gave the figure twice. The agent asked whether there was a means of divesting. Garrick said yes, there is one, and it is to transfer custody to a lawful custodian named on a county instrument, and there is exactly one of those in Cairn Vered, and his name is Tovin Ash. The agent signed inside the hour. He signed for all of them, 4,111, without haggling, because a liability of that size does not haggle, and he was on the evening boat. Colvin Varen stood at the front of that hall for all of it, and did not sit down and did not interrupt once, which I will say for him. At the end of it, he came across the floor to where I was standing, and he stopped about 4 feet away. I said, in the autumn you told me to write something better. He said, I remember what I told you. I said, somebody did. Then I pointed at Garrick's box and said, you did. On the 16th of October. It is 9 pages long. It is the finest piece of drafting anybody in this hall has ever seen. It has just moved 4,000 people out of your hands, and there is not one word in it I could have improved. He looked at the box for a while. Then he said, that is fair, and turned round and went out through the side door, and every guildmaster in that hall watched him do it. While Garrick was still reading, out at the basin, Jen Marrow's hulls were loading. I am prouder of that than of anything. And it was not my idea, it was hers. She had 4 hulls tied at the works wall from the Sunday. She said, I am not waiting for a clerk. I said, we do not have an order yet. She said, I have a berth booked and a tide, and you can settle it afterwards. Kettle cut the relief into the dead level at 7 in the morning. Water under the floor, heat going down into it. By the 9th hour, the stair was passable to the 31st step, with ice packed on the treads, and men working 7 minutes each, and me at the top shouting the count. The furnace manager drew the furnaces at noon, on Garrick's order, brought up from the hall by a boy running, and his sister's boy came up the stair at the 4th hour of the afternoon on a board. 311 out of the lower gallery in 6 hours and a half, every one of them onto a deck. Jen Marrow moved every one of them off Varen ground over the next 19 days, invoiced Tovin Ash for everyone, and Tovin paid it. There is the receipt. A man's own signature, read out in a market hall, and 7 hulls going down the cut with the decks full. I have not put anything in this part that spoils it, and I am not going to. That afternoon was the best thing that happened in that year, and it was allowed to be what it was. Varen was back inside a week. He did not fight the transfer, he did not appeal, and he did not sulk. He went to Tovin Ash on the 4th day and offered to build the yards. Not fund them, build them. He had masons, timber, canal rights, 4,000 dependents who needed work now that the works were shut, and he had the one thing the holders had never had, which is capital. Tovin said no. He said no for 9 days in front of his own guild, and on the 10th day, his guild voted against him, because a burial guild with 4,100 new people on its instrument needs roofs more than it needs a principal. Ubriel put it to the vote, and Ubriel spoke for it, and the 2 of them did not speak for a month, which is the longest either of them has managed. By August House, Varen was the largest builder of yards in Cairn Vered, and Colvin Varen had a seat at every table where anything was decided, and he had got there by losing, and he has never once pretended otherwise. Now the price, and it did not come on the day, and that separation matters, because that is how it happened. The debit for the exclusion list came up on the bollard at Ashcombe Basin about a minute after I stood up, and I could not read it properly because my eyes would not hold still, and it took me until the evening to get through it. Debit applied. Your recall has been adjusted. Withdrawn. The period from the 1st of the 3rd month to the last of the 6th month of this year. 4 months. Not a name and not a face. 4 months of my life taken out in one piece, and it is the only debit I have ever had that was itemized by date instead of by thing. The Hungry Gap is gone. Fell Harrow is gone, and I have stood in that valley since, and it is a place I have never been. The Drove Roads and the Fisks. Low Hesk on the shoulder track. The thing coming down onto the fold. The 2nd of June is gone. That is the one I mind. I know what happened on the 2nd of June because it is written in 9 places, and because there is a girl in a cradle in the Draywall ore yard who tells me about it when I ask her, and I have to ask her, and she does it patiently. And I could not read again for 4 days. And on the second of those 4 days, I went up to the ore yard, and there was a woman on a cradle with a board on a crate and a pencil tied to her wrist with twine, and I did not know who she was. I knew that I knew her. That is the shape it makes. It is like walking into your own kitchen and finding one chair you cannot account for. She watched me not know for about 3 seconds, which is longer than it sounds, and there were 4 people in that yard. Then she said, "My name is Mira Selva. I am the tally keeper, and you are Kesh Arden, and you set anchors, and we have known each other since you were 14. She said it flatly, in front of all 4 of them, without stopping what she was writing. Then she said, "Sit down there and do not apologize, and give me the Ashcombe numbers, because I have 4,000 people arriving on hulls, and nobody has told me where to put them." She came back on the 3rd day. Not the 4 months, which are gone for good and are still gone. Her, the knowing of her, back where it had been, the way a name comes back an hour after you needed it. She has never mentioned it since. I have. Twice. Both times she has said, "We have work," and gone back to the board. The rules of the ending were given to all of Cairn Vered on the 9th of July by an 11-year-old girl who wanted the midges to stop biting her. And everybody who has written about it since has got that wrong on purpose because it is embarrassing. We were at Red Warren Building. 4,111 people had come off House Varen's ground on Jen Marrow's hulls over 19 days in June. And they had to be put somewhere. And the somewhere had to be built in 6 weeks in the hottest July anybody could remember. Heat is worse than cold. I did not know that in the winter, and I know it now. Cold slows a body down and holds it where it is. Heat does the other thing, and the other thing runs at about 4 times the pace, and every one of them is awake for it. Varen's masons put down 1,100 trestle beds on cut stone footings in 19 days, which nobody else in the kingdom could have done, and he was there 4 days a week in his shirt sleeves. Tovin had 600 holders by then, gravediggers, undertakers, 40 of Ril's executioners, and about 200 people who had simply walked to Red Warren and asked for work. And they had methods and apprentices and a written standard for the first time. Margit Saul allocated the cold. Mira had the board, 12 feet of it under a canvas lean, and 1,100 name boards went up on stakes in the first fortnight, and the row went past the end of the flat and up onto the shoulder. And Garrick Pell sat in a tent from the 4th hour to the 11th, every day for 5 weeks, entering every one of those names into a county register by hand, because a custody instrument is worth nothing until the persons in it are named. That is what he was doing when he found it. He was not looking for it. He was reading the public tier windows terms, because he had run out of things to read. He said to me, at the flap of the tent, on the 6th of July, "Do you know what is at the bottom of everybody's window?" I said, "The known issues count." He said, "Under that." I said, "Nothing." He said, "There is a line under it. It has been there since the 1st hour of the 1st day. And it is on every window in the country, including yours. And I have asked a dozen people this week, and not one of them has read it." Then he showed me his, which is a thing a man can do with a public tier window if he is willing to describe it out loud. And he read it to me in the voice he uses for warrants. Petition. Propose an entry. Entries proposed by the bound require sufficient knowing acceptance. Current proposals, 0. I said, "That says 0. He said, "It has said 0 since August, and everybody in Cairn Vered has looked straight past it for a year, because it says 0, and a thing that says 0 looks broken." Then he said, "But it does not say broken. It says 0. Those are different words, and I would like to know why nobody has produced the second one." He had the answer inside 5 days, and he got it the way he gets everything, which is by writing to parish clerks. People had tried. Of course they had. In the first 3 weeks, about 200 people in that kingdom had found that line and pressed it, and every single one of them had been refused. A woman in Ostley whose husband was under a cart, 3 priests, a man in the capital who proposed an entry that would have made him king, a great many parents. Everyone refused, and by the 4th week it had gone round as a joke. The wishing button, ask it for a pony. And what Garrick found is the thing nobody else in a year had done. The refusals are long. They are about 400 words each, and everybody stopped at the first line, which says the proposal has not been accepted, and put their window away and went and told their neighbor it was broken. Garrick wrote to 30 parishes and asked for anybody who had been refused and could still remember the text, and he got 2 who could, and he made both of them recite it, while a clerk wrote it down, and the 2 versions agreed word for word. He came out of that tent with it on 3 sheets, and said, "This is not a refusal. This is a set of instructions, and it has been sitting in 200 people's heads for a year. We tested it on the 9th, because you do not act act on a recited document, you act on one you have watched arrive. The problem was who. An editor cannot write. That is at the head of the terms, and it is absolute. And I read it 3 times looking for a gap, and there is not one. My window has a field in it, and the field is dead, and it has been dead since the afternoon of the collapse. Only the bound may author, which means a person the rule would govern. And since the rule we needed governs everyone who breathes, in principle, it could have been anybody in that field. In practice, it had to be somebody who would not mind being refused in public. And it had to be small, because you do not test a lock with your house key. Nim had been at Red Warren since the middle of June, in a cradle at the end of the second row, with her board and a pencil lashed to her good hand, doing what she does now, which is sequencing. She works out the order the rows get turned in. She has the whole 1100 in her head by name and condition, and she is better at it than anybody. And Tovin's holders come to her at the change of every watch, and she tells them what to do. There are midges at Red Warren. The flat is river ground, and in July, there is a haze of them off the water at both ends of the day. And everybody who has ever worked that flat has spent every July of their life swatting. She cannot swat. She has one hand, and it is the hand she writes with, and it is holding a pencil, and she cannot move below the hip. And she had been lying in that haze for 3 weeks. She said, "Put me down for the test." I said no. She said, "Why not?" I said, "Because you are going to be refused in front of about 400 people, and I am not doing that to you." She said, "There it is again." And Garrick, who did not know what she meant, looked between the two of us and had the sense to say nothing. Then she said, "And I have picked the thing already, and it is a good pick. And if you make somebody else do it, they will pick something worthy, and it will muddy the test." She said, "I am going to propose that the Red Warren midge does not bite." She said it perfectly seriously, and nobody laughed, and that should be recorded, because there were about 30 people around that cradle by then, and not one of them laughed. She said, "It is small, it is true, it is the kind of thing this county would want. And I am one of the bound, because I am being bitten." So we did it at the 6th hour of the evening on the 9th of July, with about 400 people on the flat, because word had gone round and the rows had stopped. She composed it herself, 9 words. She would not let Garrick draft it because she said a clerk would put unnecessary matter in it, and she was correct. The index took 12 seconds. I know because Garrick counted them out loud. Then it answered, and it answered at length. In the register it has used for everything since the first hour, and it did it while the second row was going over in the heat, 40 feet away, and Tovin's holders were running. Petition received. Thank you for using the petition service. Your proposal has not been accepted at this time. Then it gave the reasons, and it gave them as a numbered list. And Garrick had a clerk taking it down, and 4 other people were writing as fast as they could. 1. An entry may be proposed only by the bound. Accepted. 2. Acceptance must be knowing. The accepting party must understand the entry and its effect upon themselves. Acceptance obtained by compulsion, purchase, deception, or from a party who is not conscious of accepting is not recorded. 3. An entry binds every party who accepts it. No exemption, exception, reservation, or delay clause may be attached. Proposals containing such are not accepted. 4. An entry may not restore a removed entry. Proposals to that effect are not accepted. 5. Sufficient knowing acceptance has not been reached. Garrick said, out loud, into a silence, "Define sufficient." And the index answered him, because it answers exactly what is asked. And what it said is the sentence that is now written on the wall of every guild hall in Cairn Vired. Sufficient means sufficient. We do not publish this figure. Thank you for your patience. We are aware of reduced service in some areas. Please rate your experience. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Nim said, "So it is not broken, it is just rude." Then she said, "And I would like somebody to fetch a net for this cradle, because I have proved the point and I am still being eaten." 4 people went for netting. Varon Stewart sent 40 bolts up from the work stores next morning without being asked. By the end of that week, every cradle at Red Warren had net over it, and it is on all of them now, everywhere. And that is what came out of the first petition in the history of Cairn Vired. The copies went out that night. Osk's novices wrote out 40 of them by lamp before midnight, and Orla's writers had them at the head of the cut by the second morning and in the capital in 4 days. Orla had 9 riders by then, and she had trained every one of them herself. She rides with the buckles rigged, so she can work them with the heels of her hands, and she taught the whole 9 to do it her way, whether they needed to or not. She said, "In a year they will all be old and slow, and I will still be able to get a paper to Vered hold in 3 days, and I would like that on the record because everybody keeps looking at my face. Inside a fortnight, there were 3 drafts in the kingdom, and I had seen all 3 because everybody wanted the man who broke it to tell them their draft was clever. Vold's came first, by courier, from the Northern Army's office at Fel Harrow, and it was short and it was honest, and it had one clause in it that mattered. He proposed an ending, chosen and accepted, binding upon every acceptor, saving only such persons as hold the crown's commission or serve under it, whose acceptance shall be deferred until the security of the realm permits. Garrick read that clause 4 times and then said, he has written an exemption and a delay clause into the same sentence, and the index refuses both by name, and he had the numbered list in his hand when he said it. I said, does he know? Garrick said, he has been sent it. Every parish has been sent it. Then he said, I do not think he believes it applies to him, and that is not stupidity. That is a man who has never once been told no by an instrument. Keynes came second, and it was better drafted, and it was the one that frightened me. It had no exemptions in it at all. It was 4 lines long, it was clean, and underneath it was a plan for gathering acceptances at scale, parish by parish, by the choir's own people, at the rate of about 2,000 a week. Varen's came third, and it was the most honest of the 3 in its way, because it proposed that acceptance might be given by a person's lawful custodian on their behalf, at the custodian's discretion, and it did not pretend to be anything other than what it was. Garrick sent all 3 the same reply, which was the numbered list, with the relevant number underlined, and he sent it under his own hand, as a clerk of the magistracy, with no authority whatsoever to do it. And then Ilse Rand stopped all 3 of them dead in about 3 minutes, in the open, at Redwarren, on the 14th of July. She had been sent for by the choir. Kane wanted the chapter's certification for his gathering scheme, because number 2 on the list requires a competent authority to say that acceptance was knowing, and there is exactly one such authority in Cairnvered, and it is her. She came out to the head of the 2nd row with the register under her arm, and about 600 people on the flat, and she did not make a speech, because she does not. She said, I have read the terms. I will certify knowing acceptance, and I will not certify anything else. And I will tell you now what I will not certify, so that nobody wastes a season. She said, I will not take a person who has been awake for more than 30 hours. I will not certify a person under opium. I will not certify a person who has been asked more than twice. I will not certify a person who has been asked by somebody who feeds them. She said, and I will not certify anyone who has been asked in a row in front of the others, where refusing means being the one who refused. Kane's man said, that is every one of them. She said, yes, that is my finding. And it is why this is going to take years and not weeks. And I did not make the rule. I am reading it off the same 3 sheets you are. Then came the thing nobody in that field could answer. And I have heard it thrown at her since by 4 different factions, and none of them has answered it yet. She said, consent taken from an exhausted, frightened, suffering person in front of the people who hold their food is not consent. That is not physician's fussiness. That is the difference between an ending and a clearance. Kane's man said, and while you are being careful, they are lying in this heat. She said, I know. I allocate the ice. I know to the hour, and I am still not going to certify it. Mira did it on the 16th, 2 days later, and she did it in front of the same field, and she had arranged for the guilds to be there, which I did not find out until afterwards. She had them carry her out to the head of the flat where the board is, and she had Osk's book with her, and she read out her own line from it first, name, parish, injury, and the hours, which by then were 7,460. Then she said, when there is an entry that the index will take, I will accept it first, in public, in front of whoever wants to watch, and I will sign my own name to it, or make my own mark. She said, I am saying it now, before there is a draft, so that nobody can say later that I was persuaded, or that I was tired that day, or that somebody got to me. Then she said, and I am not doing it because I want to be an example. I am doing it because I am the most looked at person in this country, and that is a fact I did not ask for, and I would be a fool not to spend it. Kane went to her within the day. Vold's commissary within 3, Varen's steward within 4, and he was the only one who asked her what she wanted instead of telling her. She said the same thing to all 3, which was that she would accept the first entry the index took, whoever wrote it, and that whoever wrote it had better write it properly, because she was not going to accept twice. That made her the most valuable person in Cairnvered to 3 factions at once, and Tovin offered her a guard on the 2nd row, and Ilse offered to move her cradle to the physician's end where the tents are closed. She refused both. She said, I have spent a year telling people not to arrange things around me, and I will not start being an exception on the day it becomes convenient. She said one other thing to me that night, at the board, with the lamp on and the flat quiet. She said, 3 men are going to spend the next month trying to be the one who writes it. Watch which of them asks a single person in a cradle what they would like it to say. The hollow choir brought 16 carts of acceptances onto the Red Warren flat on the 3rd of August, and there were 4,206 sheets in them, and the index counted none. Let me say what Caney actually did to get them, because the version that went round afterwards is a lie in his favor and a lie against him at once. And both are lazy. He did not force anybody. There was no violence in it anywhere, and I have never heard of one instance. What he did was worse and far more ordinary. He sent his people down the rows at the end of a watch, in the heat, with water, and they sat with each person as long as it took, and they were kind. And they were the only people in that county with time. They asked them at the 28th hour, with the row listening. They asked again the next day if the answer was no, and again the day after, and they asked while holding the cup. And they asked a great many people on opium, because in August almost everybody who is asked anything is on opium, that being the point of it. 4,206 people made a mark on a sheet. I have read 600 of those sheets since, and I do not believe a handful were lying about wanting it. Nobody wants that part. They did want it. Most of them wanted it very much. The wanting was never the thing in question, and Kane could not be made to see that for all that summer. He presented them on the flat because he wanted it witnessed. That is to his credit, and it is also why it went the way it did, because in private, he could have gone away and thought about it. About 2,000 people were there. The guilds, the chapter, Vold's commissary, Varen's stewards, 1,100 cradles, and everybody working them. Osk had the carts unloaded in stacks by parish, and Kane stood up on a mounting block and did not make a speech, and he said, "We have every one of them here and I will submit them now." He proposed his entry, the clean one, 4 lines, no exemptions, best drafted of the 3, and everybody knew it. Then he submitted the sheets. The index took about a minute, which is the longest anybody has known it take over anything. Petition received. Thank you for your patience. Your proposal has not been accepted at this time. Acceptances received 4,206. Acceptances recorded 0. Then it gave the reasons, and it gave them individually, which nobody had expected, and that was the thing that broke the day open. It went through them by number, because it does not know names, and by ground, and Garrick had 4 clerks writing, and they could not keep up. 2,034 refused for want of understanding at the time of acceptance. 940 for acceptance obtained from a party under a soporific, 611 for acceptance obtained by a party providing sustenance, 402 for repetition of the request after refusal, and then a category nobody had thought of, 219 refused because the accepting party was not conscious of accepting, which means somebody had put a pencil in a hand. Kane went and looked at that number himself. He got Osk to find him the parish, and he stood there and read it. Then he came back to the block and he said the thing I cannot hold against him, and I have tried. He said, every one of those 219 was asked by a man or a woman of my order who has sat with the dying for 20 years and who could not bear one more day of it. I know exactly how that happens. I am not going to pretend I do not. He was given his scene, and he took it, and he was completely right, and everybody in that field knew it. He said, Dr. Rand will not certify a person who has been awake more than 30 hours. There is a man in the 4th row who has been awake for 7,900 hours. He said, she will not certify a person on opium. He has been on it for a year because the alternative is that he screams and she is the one who prescribed it correctly. He said, she will not certify a person asked by somebody who feeds them. Every single person in this field is fed by somebody. There is nobody else to ask them. He said, so I'm told to wait. Tell me how long. Tell me the number of days that is honest, and I will wait them. Ilsaran said, I cannot give you a number. He said no, and that is my whole case, and I am going to go on being right about it every day until somebody gets this done, and I would rather be told I was wicked than told I was hasty, because hasty is a word for people who are not listening to it at night. Nobody in that field answered him. Mira did not answer him, and she was the only person who could have. Then he did the other half of it, which is why he lost, and he did it about 4 minutes later while he was still right. He said, we will ask them again, better, with Osk's people, with witnesses, at the 3rd hour instead of the 28th, with the physicians present if they will come, and we will do it 4,000 times, and then we will do it 4,000 more. And Osk said, no. He said it from the ground, next to a cart, in front of 2,000 people, To the man who took him in at 11 and taught him to write. He said prior, I have been counting hours for a year. I have 4,100 names, and I know what every one of them has had done to them and by whom, and about 600 of the entries I made this summer are ours. He said, I wrote down that we asked Simvale of Redwarren 4 times. I wrote it in my own hand, because I write everything down, and the 4th time, I was holding the cup. Cain said, and would you have him wait? Osk said, I would have him asked once, properly, by somebody who is not carrying his water, and I do not know how to arrange that, and neither do you. And going faster is not the answer to not knowing how. Then Cain said, give me the book. Osk had it under his arm. 4,100 names and the hours. He had carried it out of an occupied works in the hand of a girl who is now in a cradle at the end of the 2nd row. He did not give it to him. He walked across about 40 feet of open ground with 2,000 people watching, and he put it into my hands. I said, I cannot use this. He said, I know. He said, that is why. He said, everybody in this field is drafting except you. You are the only person here who cannot write an entry. It is the only book of its kind, and I have watched what happens to it in 3 sets of hands this year. Then he said, and when somebody writes one that the index takes, they are going to need the hours, and I would like the hours to be somewhere that cannot want anything. Cain did not stop him and did not speak to him. He had the carts loaded, and they went south that evening. Osk stayed at Redwarren, and I have never asked what those two said to each other. The rider came in from the drift road on the 5th. Anka Vosk keeps the signal tower above Lobeck and does not leave it, and a rider instead of a tower message means she does not want it in a code others on the line can read. Her rider said, it has come over the fell shoulder. I said, that is not possible. He said, I know. She said you would say that. And she said to tell you it came over the shoulder at the steep end, and she watched it do it for 2 days. The fell shoulder at the steep end is 1 in 3, and 11,000 tons does not go up 1 in 3. The ground under the front fails before the mass moves, and it goes in instead of up, and that is the whole reason the fell line worked in May. I went up with Kettlevance and Sifa, and we were on that shoulder in 3 days, and we found out what had happened before we found the track. Kettle put a bar under a boulder about the size of a cart to lever a look at the ground, and the boulder came up like a bucket. He stood there holding it, then he put it down very carefully and stepped back and said, Kesh, come and pick this up. I picked it up. It is about 1,100 weight, and I picked it up with 2 hands and my back straight, and I had to stop and put it down, because I did not know what to do with the fact of it. It is not everywhere. That is the first thing. It is a patch about 2 miles across on the top of the fell shoulder, and outside, that patch a boulder is a boulder, and my back is my back. Inside it, weight does not go all the way down. Kettle worked it out in about an hour with a plank and a stone. The load is there at the top, and it is not there at the bottom, and the ground under it never gets told. He said, so it did not climb. It floated up. And then he said, and the 3rd one of these is worse than the first 2, and I would like to know who I complained to. The number at the bottom of every window in Cairn Varid read 3. By the time we came off that hill, it could climb. That is the whole of the consequence, and it is enough. Every firm ground map we had, including the one Margit Saul's clerk chained out behind it in May, was a map of where an 11,000-ton mass could go when weight worked. It was on the near side of the shoulder and going down toward the Redwarren Flats at a mile a day, and the flats have 1,100 cradles on them. Weeks, not months. Which meant I had to know what makes an acceptance count. Exactly, in the index's own words. And there was only one way to get it, and I had never done it, and did not know it was there. Old Cassell asked me to do it, which should be said first because I did not go to him. He had been at Redwarren since June, in the 10th row, and had spent the summer being fetched. Cain's people, Varen's steward, 2 broadsheets. He said to me, on the 7th, everybody in this country wants me to be an argument. I have been an argument since February. I would like to be a man who gets an answer, and then I will go back to being an argument. I said, I do not know what I can get you. He said, you put your hands on things. I have watched you do it a dozen times this summer, and you think nobody notices. Put them on me and find out what I have to do. I said, I have done that once to a person, and I said I would not do it again. He said, then this is the first time somebody has asked you, and that is a different thing entirely, and you know it is or you would not have brought it up. I had one hand on old Cassell's wrist, and the other flat on Cain's draft, which Garrick had a fair copy of, because I could not think of any other way to make it be about the 2 of them at once. I had never tried to hold 2 things, and it had not occurred to me that there was such a thing to try. I did it because a man asked me a question with 2 objects in it. It came, and it did not come the way the others come. The others arrived like reading a slate. That one arrived like standing up too fast on a ladder. The ground went. I was aware that I was still holding both and could not feel my legs, and somewhere, a long way off, Sepha Loon said my name in a voice I had not heard her use. They held me up. Sepha had me under one arm, and Tovin Ash had the other, and Kettle had the back of my collar. And Osk got his hands under my wrist and Castle's wrist and held the two of them together because I was letting go and did not know it. It took about 4 minutes. I have been told about 4 minutes by 3 of the people holding me. Entry proposed and person bound. The relation is acceptance. Acceptance is recorded where the party has been informed of the entry and its effect upon themselves, in the presence of the informing party, by a party who has themselves been informed. And the party retains, at the moment of acceptance, the ability to refuse. That is all of it. And it is the shape of the thing, and I had it repeated back to me a dozen times that evening because I could not hold it in my head for more than a minute at a stretch. In person, not read out to a field, not posted at a church door, not delegated to a clerk with a list. By somebody who has themselves been informed, which means it can be taught outward, which is the only mercy in the whole entry. And they have to be able to say no at the moment, which means nobody who is held down, nobody who is asleep, nobody who is being fed by the person asking, and nobody in a row where saying no is a public act. Ilse Ran was standing 4 feet away when it was read out, and she stayed quiet for a while, and then she said, "That is my finding. Word for word. That is my finding, and it is in their terms, and I did not know." Then the bill came, and it was the largest I had ever been sent. Debit applied. Your recall has been adjusted. Withdrawn. The 12-month preceding the 8th of September of last year, and the 8th of September of last year. I do not remember the collapse. I know it happened. There are 400 people who were there, and I know I was on a rope on the upper gallery because it is in Mira's survey book in her hand, and I know what I typed because I have written it out about a dozen times. But I was not there, and a whole year in front of it is not there either. I do not remember Draywall before the shelf went, and I do not remember Bram teaching me anchors, and he taught me anchors that spring. And I do not remember Mira Selva standing up. That is the one. I have known her since I was 14, and every memory I have of her is a woman on a cradle with a board propped on a crate, and I am told that is not what she was, and I have to take that on other people's word. I know what I did, and I know it was for her, because it is written in 9 places in my own hand. I do not know why. That is the part that is gone. I went out and put both hands flat on Mira's board. There was nothing in it for me, and I knew that standing there, because nothing comes for days after a big one. I am a man who prices loads, and I stood in a field with my hands on a plank of pine, trying to buy a year back off it, until Oz came and took my wrists away. He did not tell me it does not work like that. He said, "Not today." Cephaloon turned round and made the crew turn round with her. Nim worked out what had gone about 5 hours later, because Nim works everything out, and she sent for me and read me the second row's turning order to see whether that was still there. It was. She said, "Good, that is work. Work stays." Then she said, "The other things are on my slates. I have kept everyone since August, and you may have them whenever you like, and you are not to be embarrassed about asking." I said, "I do not remember the day you went into the vent." She said, "No. But I do, and Bram does, and there are 400 of us, and between all of us, we have got the whole of it, and that will have to be how it is now." So we knew what the ending required, in its own words, and it was this. Every person in Cairn Vered who is going to accept has to be told in person, by somebody who has themselves been told, in a place where they are able to refuse, and then they have to say yes, and the index will not tell anybody how many that is. There are 2.5 million people in this kingdom, 1,100 at Red Warren, 4,000 at Fell Harrow, and 140 yards between here and the sea. And there is no day, and no place, and no reason in the world that would ever put all of them in the same field at the same time, sober, informed, and paying attention. Except one, and it was coming over the shoulder at a mile a day, and it was going to arrive whether anybody was ready or not. On the 11th of August, 1 year less 4 weeks from the afternoon I do not remember, we had a month, one place to put it, and no crane in Cairn Vered that was not the property of the Northern Army. The place was Kettle Vance's, and he had been walking it since the 2nd week of July. There is a hollow on the drift upland, about a mile north of the fell shoulder, that the shepherds call the Ladle. 3 sides of rock, one open end on the firm line, floor about 1,200 yards across, and it sits 400 feet below the canal head, at Broken Mile. He said that is a bowl with a door in it, and I can shut the door. Then he said, and before you get pleased with yourself, shutting a door on that thing is not holding it, because it will stand at the shut end and lean, and 11,000 tons leaning on a rubble face gets out in about a season. I said, so what holds it? He said, you tell me, you are the one who prices loads. Water holds it. Nothing else in that country is heavy enough, and there was 100,000 tons of it, 400 feet uphill in a canal that Jen Marrow's family have worked for 4 generations. The plan was 3 things, and every one of them had to work on the same day. Kettle shapes the ladle. The open end gets a face dropped across it, cut and shaped over 12 days so that it falls as a wall and not as a slope. And that takes 400 charges and about 800 men to drill them. We put it in, heat and noise down the firm line from the fell shoulder the way we did it in May, but bigger because it has learned the May route and will not take it, so the fires have to come at it from the other side and push. Then Jen Marrow's people cut the broken mile head into the old fell bed, and the bed runs into the ladle. And 400 feet of fall puts 100,000 tons of water into a rock bowl in about 9 hours. Under 100 feet of water and a rubble wall, it has nothing to push against and nothing to climb. And it is not killed, and it is not finished, and it is not going anywhere. And that was all we had. It needed every crane, every crew, every hull, every guild hand, and every yard in the kingdom in one place at one time, in the second week of August. And I had none of them. Marshal Raskvold had all of it. I went to Fell Harrow on the 12th, and he saw me inside an hour, which I had not expected, and he had the whole plan on his table already, because Margit Saul had sold it to him and told me she had. He said, "It is a good plan." I said, "Then release the crews." He said, "No." Then he said, "Sit down, because I am going to say something you will not like, and I would rather you heard all of it." He said, "I will release 9,000 men, 211 cranes, and the northern road on the day the entry that goes to the index carries the clause I sent you in July." I said, "The index refuses exemptions by name." He said, "I have read that." I said, "Then you know the clause cannot be in it." He said, "I know that the index says so. I do not accept that a service which has been apologizing for reduced service for a year is the final authority on what it will and will not do. And neither would you if it were your country." I said, "It is not an opinion, it is the terms." He said, "Everything is the terms until somebody tests it." I argued with him for about 2 hours, and I lost every exchange. And that should be put down honestly, because I have read 3 accounts since that have me winning it. I said, 400,000 people are going to be on that upland. He said, "And they will still be there next month if I do not send a crane, because nothing ends." I said, "The ladle closes for 1 season without the water." He said, "Then take the season and come back to me in the spring with a better draft." I said, "People are going to be ruined doing this." He said, "Yes, and if I bind the army to an ending, I will have a country with no instrument of command in it inside a year, and then a great many more will be ruined, and none of it will be visible enough for anyone to write about." He said, "I am not being wicked at you. I have thought about this longer than you have, and I have more to lose, and I will not be moved by the number of people standing in a field." I said, "Then what would move you?" He said, "An instrument I could not get out of." I said, "That is what the entry is." He said, "No, that is what the entry is for everybody else. Bring me one I cannot get out of, and I will sign it in front of my own officers. And until you do, I am keeping the cranes." The commission was in a frame on the wall behind him, and I had been looking at it for 2 hours. I asked to read it. He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I read things." He said, "Everybody in this kingdom knows what you are and what it costs you. And if you want to spend a piece of your own head on a piece of paper on my wall, that is your affair. And it is a copy. The original is at the hold." It is not a copy in the way he meant. It is the sealed duplicate, and it is the instrument. And I put both hands flat on the glass and stood there in front of him for about a minute and a half. Commission, crown, marshal. Confers command upon the person named while the commission stands. The commission stands by the same force as any instrument drafted and sealed by a living man. Unless that force is denied by the holder, in which case it stands as to nobody. I said nothing at all. I thanked him for the 2 hours, and I went out and sat on the step of the commissary's office and worked out what I had just been given. His authority is made of the one thing he told an entire kingdom in writing that he does not recognize. Not a court, not a contract, not an oath, not a petition, and not any instrument that any living man can draft. His commission is an instrument drafted and sealed by a living man. It is the only reason 9,000 soldiers do what he says. The bill came about 2 minutes later. Debit applied. 1 item withdrawn from your recall. The 6 months you spent at the Ostley Works before you were apprenticed. I have been told since that I hated it, and that I came home in the spring and would not talk about it, and that my father said it was the making of me. All of that is other people's. Ilse Ron has that debit written on a card, in my hand, dated, and she has 31 of them now, and she has never once told me what the shape of them adds up to. and I have never asked. Now the part that matters, and it is about 6 sentences long, and it took me 2 days to do. I could have used it. I had it in my head, I could recite it, and there was a magistracy in Veredhold and a broadsheet in 3 counties, and Garrick Pell, who would have drafted the application in an afternoon and enjoyed it. And it would have been me doing it, which meant it would have been me again, deciding what a room full of people could carry and handing them the result afterwards. So I went to Lohesk instead, and it took me 2 days to make myself do it. He was at Broken Mile, living in a canal cottage with his sister, and working as a lock-keeper's man for 12 shillings a week, and he had been there since June, and he came to the door in his shirt. I said, "I have got something, and I do not want it." He read the wording off my slate about 6 times, then he said, "Do you know what this is?" I said, "I know what it says." He said, "That is not the same thing at all." He said, "This is not an argument. Every officer in the Northern Army has taken his oath against it, and if it is read out in front of them by somebody who is not a lawyer, it stops being a legal question and becomes a question about whether their oath is worth anything." He said, "Who else have you shown this to?" I said, "Nobody." He said, "Why me?" I said, "Because you have got nothing left to lose, and because I have a crew who will not speak to me over something I decided on my own in a level in June, and because you are the only man I know who has already paid for doing the right thing slowly." He said, "That is 3 reasons, and the third one is about you." I said, "Yes." He said, "All right." Then he said, "And I want you a long way away when I do it, because if you are in that room, it is the editor's trick, and if I am on my own, it is a soldier's question." I was not there. I have it from 7 people, 4 of whom were officers, and they all have it the same way. He walked into the Fell Harrow officers' mess on the 19th of August in a coat with no rank on it, which nobody stopped because a stripped captain walking into a mess is embarrassing and not dangerous. There were about 40 of them. He did not address Vold. He asked the senior major present whether he might read something aloud, and the major, who I am told had served under him for 6 years, said yes. He read the commission wording. Then he read Vold's proclamation of last October, the parish copy, the one every man in that room had heard read in his own village. Not by court, not by contract, not by oath, not by petition, not by any instrument that any living man can draft. Then he said one sentence, and it is the only thing anybody remembers him saying that day. He said, "Gentlemen, if that is true, then what are you standing here under?" Vold did not answer it. 4 people have told me he did not answer it, and 2 have told me he did not try, and 1 told me he looked at the floor for about 10 seconds, which for that man is a long time. Then he stood up and said, "The crews are released on the 22nd, all of them, with the cranes," and he walked out of his own mess. He released 9,000 men and 211 cranes, and he did it without conceding 1 inch of the argument in public. And inside a week he had entered the petition as an acceptor, with his exemption still in his own draft. He signed his own name to a proposal the index has already refused twice by number, and he did it deliberately, so that nobody could say he had not accepted, and so that he would be inside the process on the day and could argue it from there. Garrick said he has understood exactly 1/2 of it. He said he thinks being in the room is what matters. He has never once in his life been in a room where being in it did not matter. Cephaloon came to me at Red Warren on the 20th and asked for the anchor, and I had not offered it to her, and I was not going to. There is one position in that plan that cannot be held by a machine. When kettle drops the face across the open end of the ladle, 400 men have to be under the north shelf, laying the last of the charges, and that shelf is held by a single cable head. The cable head sits on ground inside the weight patch. No crane holds there. A crane sets its feet by putting weight into the ground, and the ground inside that patch never gets told there is any. So it has to be a body, and it has to be a body that can take about 1,100 weight of running load for something over an hour, and there is one of those in the world. She said, "I have counted it up. 3 times I have gone at something because I was the only one who could, and every single time it got worse, and I have spent all summer working out the difference between that and this." I said, "And what is it?" She said, "This time the job is to stand still and hold. Nothing about it is impressive, and nobody will ever describe it properly afterwards. That is how I know it is the right one." Then she said, "Do not make a thing of it. I have been the wrong tool for a year, and I have finally found the one job in this kingdom that is shaped like me, and no rope man with a slate is going to talk me out of it with a slate." Orlovek's relay carried the terms, and it is the only reason any of it was possible, and it belongs in the same breath as the cranes. Number 2 on the index's list is that acceptance must be knowing. And rung 4 had given us what knowing means, told in person, by somebody who has themselves been told, in a place where they can refuse, which is not a proclamation and cannot be posted, and cannot go by tower, because a tower message is a message and not a person. Orla had 31 riders by August. They went out from Red Warren in the 3rd week carrying nothing but themselves and what they had been told, and each of them told the holders at 4 yards, and each of those told their own rows. It took 19 days to cover Cairn Vared, and it is the only communication system in that kingdom that Marshal Vold did not control, and every single rider on it had been trained by a girl with 4 fingers. She said to me, when the last of them went out, that this was the thing she had been for, and that if she had not gone through the ice at the ford, she would have been leading them herself and would have been half as good at it. Margit Saul priced the operation and people on the 24th in front of the guilds at Red Warren, and nobody had asked her to. She said, there will be 411,000 people on that upland, 9,000 soldiers, 6,000 holders, the crews, the guilds, and every yard in the country emptied into one field. She said, of those on my tables, adjusted for a mass operation on broken ground with cranes, 211 will not walk off it. She said, they will not die. Nobody dies. They will be crushed or fall or be under something, and they will be alive afterwards, and they will be in cradles, and I cannot tell you which 211, and neither can anybody else. Then she said, and I have brought the number here and said it out loud, because if this is going to be done on knowing acceptance, then the people doing the lifting are entitled to know what they are accepting too, and nobody has thought to tell them. Tovin Ash stood up and said, the holders will go. He said, we buried people for 400 years, and we know exactly what a number like that costs, and we are going anyway. Bram Cole took the sequence for the cranes on the 26th, 211 of them on broken ground in 12 days, and he read Margit's number first and then took it, and he has never told me what he thinks about it. He gave me the sequence himself, at the board, out loud, and it was the first thing he had said to me since June that was not strictly an instruction, and it was still strictly an instruction. Jen Marrow costed the canal cut at Broken Mile and put a line at the bottom called National Interest for the 2nd time in her life, and Margit Soul paid it out of the guild's fund without arguing, which Jen has never forgiven her for. She said on the wharf that being paid without an argument was the worst thing that had happened to her all year. I said, you have been trying to get that number out of somebody for a year. She said, out of somebody who fought me for it. There is no pleasure in a number nobody fights you over. Then she said, and I will tell you the other thing, since we are being sentimental. In a year you have never once asked me to do anything for nothing. Everybody else has, including the prior. She said, I have not decided whether that is respect or whether you simply have no charm, and I would rather not find out. The cranes came down the Draywall Road on the 28th of August in a column 14 miles long, and I stood on the crane deck of my own quarry and watched the Northern Army haul 211 cranes north past the gate they had sealed in February. Every parish between here and the coast turned out to watch them go. That is the receipt, and there is no signature on it anywhere. And behind them, all that week, came everybody else. The yards emptying, 4,000 from Fell Harrow, 1,100 from Red Warren, the 140 parish yards, on hulls and carts and hurdles, up the northern road toward one field on the drift. On the 9th of September, 1 year and 1 day after I broke it, every yard in Cairn Vared was emptied into the high pasture above the Draywall quarry, and from the lip of that field you can see the terrace where the shelf went. I have stood in a doorway and looked down a row of these 3 times. A guild hall in August, 7 cradles on a stone floor, a valley at Fell Harrow in March that I cannot see the end of and do not remember arriving at. And this, 11,409 cradles in rows 100 long, everyone with a stake at the head and the name board on it, and 6,000 holders walking the lines with buckets and blankets and ledgers. 411,000 people on one field. The yards, the guilds, the crews, the parishes, 9,000 soldiers, 211 cranes on the Ladle Road, and a mile and a half north of it, the thing. Oldcastle wrote the entry. Not Kane, not Garrick, who drafted it, and not me, who cannot. He is one of the bound and had been saying out loud since February what he wanted. It is 3 lines long. Awareness may end in a creature that breathes air, where that creature has knowingly accepted this entry, and where its body is beyond keeping, or it has asked before a witness who has been told. It ends by no other hand, and for no other reason. It does not touch anyone who has not accepted. Mira Selv accepted first at the 4th hour with about 8,000 people close enough to see it. She had them carry her to the head of the first line and prop her sitting. Osk read the entry to her face. Ilsa stood as certifier and asked the 4 questions. and Mira answered all 4 flatly and asked a 5th of her own. She said, "If I accept, and then I change my mind." Ilsa said, "Then you say so and nothing happens, because it takes effect when your body is beyond keeping, or when you ask, and you have to ask." Mira said good and made her mark, and then said next because there are 11,408 behind me and we are not doing this at this pace. She had refused this privately 3 times in a year, from people who loved her or wanted her. She took it in a field in front of a country. Ilsa Rand could not certify 400,000 people, and did not try. She had worked that out in August and spent 3 weeks doing the one thing she had spent a year refusing to do, which is give it away. She trained certifiers, 240 of them, every chapter physician who would come, and, which nobody expected, 140 yard holders, gravediggers and undertakers, and 30 of Ril's executioners. She set the standard and every certifier carried it on a card, not under opium, not past 30 hours awake, not asked twice, not asked by whoever feeds you, not asked where refusing is a public act. Tovin asked her why the holders. She said, "Because they have handled these people every day for a year and can tell in 4 seconds whether somebody is present." Then she said, "And because when this is finished, I will not be able to hold it, and I would rather hand it to people who will use it properly than lose it to people who will not." She worked the line herself for 19 hours and refused 5 people, out loud, by name, in front of them, and 2 of them begged her. One was a woman from Holling, awake 8,700 hours. Ilsa said, "Not today. You have been awake since Thursday. You will be asked on the 12th, and I will come myself." The woman said, "There may not be a 12th. Ilsa said, "Then there will not, and I will still not certify you today, and that is all I have." The operation ran from the 4th hour on Bramcole's sequence. 211 cranes on broken ground in 9 stages, with Kettle's 400 charges going in along the open end of the ladle. Halder Vane had 406 people under him by then, all of them boons like his, useless to themselves and worth a crew apiece. They kept 400 men at loads for 7 hours that a body has 90 minutes in. Jen Marrow had the Broken Mile head cut and gated, 12 hulls tied above it, and her own crews on the gate, and she stood on the top lock all day with a watch in her hand. And Mira had the board, 14 feet of it, 4 boys on ladders, every rotation of every crew and every asking line on it at once, and she ran it for 19 hours without raising her voice. The count started falling at about the 7th hour. Somebody in the 4th asking line saw it and said it out loud, and it went down that field faster than any rider. That number had read 3 since August, and had never once gone down. Known issues, 2. That is what it said on every window on that hill. 9,000 soldiers stopped to look at their own hands. It went to 1 at the 11th hour, and after that every crew on that hill checked it between loads. That is why the crews kept working. Nobody had to hope. There was a number on every window in that pasture. It was going the right way, and anybody could check it between loads. Marshal Raskvold submitted his draft at the 8th hour with the exemption still in it, in front of his own officers. The index took 6 seconds. Petition received. Your proposal has not been accepted. An entry binds every party who accepts it. No exemption, exception, reservation, or delay clause may be attached. This is the 3rd occasion on which this has been explained. He read it, then had his own clerk read it out, so that the 40 men round him heard it in somebody else's voice. Then he said, "Is there a version of this that keeps the army out of it?" Garrick Pell said, "No. I have looked for 5 weeks and there is not one, and if there were, I would have found it, because finding those is the only thing I have ever been good at." Vold stood there a while with his officers watching him. Low Hesk was in that group in a coat with no rank on it, because the crews had brought him up on a cart and nobody had told him to leave. Then Vold said, "Take my name off my own draft and put it on Cassell's," and asked to be asked properly. A yard holder called Sim Dace, who used to dig graves at Ostley, read the entry to the Marshal of the Northern Army in front of his officers, and Vold answered the 4 questions and made his mark. He did not concede the argument and never has. He accepted a binding he could not exempt himself from because 40 men were watching and because his own commission is made of the same stuff. Nim was asked at the 11th hour and she said no. I did not arrange it and did not go and stand near it, and I found out afterwards, which is the only reason it was worth anything. The certifier was one of Tovin's, a woman called Belle Harrow. She read it out, asked the 4 questions, and Nim said, "I understand all of it," and then said no. Belle Harrow asked her to say it again for the record. Nim said, "No, I do not accept. Write it down and go on. You are holding up a line of 40. She told me herself that evening, before anybody else could get to me with it, because she knows me. She said, Do not make a face. I said I was not. She said, you are, and I will tell you why, and I want it from me, and not decided in your own head at 2 in the morning. She said, I am 12. I cannot walk. I have one hand and I am not going to get better. But I am the best person in this country at putting 11,000 people in the right order, and I am not finished. Then she said, and if I get to be 70, and I am tired of it, I will ask. And there will be somebody to ask. That is the whole point of it. It is not a door I have to go through today, because it is open today. I said, all right. She said, that is it. All right, that is all you are going to say. I said, you asked me not to decide anything about it, and that is me not deciding anything about it. She looked at me for a second, said good, and went back to her turning order. At about the 14th hour, the north shelf started working. The mass had come down the firm line into the open end of the ladle at the 12th hour, and 400 men were under the north shelf laying the closing charges with it, 1,200 yards off and coming. That shelf is held by one cable head, and the ground under the crane stand is inside the weight patch, where no crane sets its feet. There is one body in the world that can take 1,100 weight of running load for an hour. Cephalon accepted at the 5th hour and went up to the cable head at the 10th. She did the sum out loud in front of me before she went, in about 3 sentences, and then said, yes, obviously. At the 15th hour, I worked out that the count had not moved in 4 hours. It had sat at 1 since the 11th, with the field watching and the asking line still moving. And that was when I understood we did not have the last of it. I put one hand on the ladle's north face and one on old Cassell's cradle rail, because the seam is a place and the entry is a thing, and there was no other way to hold both. They held me up. Tovin under one arm and Kettle under the other, Osk with his hands on my wrists, and Orla Vec, who cannot hold a rope, with the heels of both hands flat against my back. Maintenance. Open. Item. Dray wall upper gallery. Overcut past bench line. Logged. Unresolved. Editor's seat assigned to nearest qualified hands at installation. That is why it went to me. There was no choosing in it. The Draywall Gallery was on the known issues list before there was an index in the sky, the way a cracked lintel is on a foreman's list. And when the thing came online, it did what a maintenance service does with its oldest open job. It sent whoever was standing on it. I was the nearest qualified pair of hands to a fault. Everything that happened to this kingdom for a year happened because a service assigned a maintenance man and then misparsed what he typed. I have been asked that question by 400 people since the second week and guessed badly every time. There is no answer, and I have never been so relieved by anything in my life. Then it gave me the condition, which was why the count had stopped. Proposed entry. Confirmation follows, the last recorded acceptance. Acceptance is recorded where the accepting party retains the ability to refuse. A party bearing a load it cannot set down does not retain it. 11,000 people in that field were under a load, and not one of their acceptances had registered, because you cannot refuse anything while you are holding up a shelf. They had to come off, all of them in rotation, be asked, and go back on, sequenced against a closing operation with the mass in the bowl and the charges half laid. I gave that to Mira in about 20 words. She had it on the board in 4 minutes and ran it for 3 hours, and it is the hardest piece of work anybody did that year. Debit applied. Your recall has been adjusted. Withdrawn, Mira Selv. Not her name. Her name is on a board on a stake and in a dozen ledgers. Not the fact of her, because the fact of her is written down in my own hand in about 400 places. Her. Everything that is not written down. I stood on the ladle rim with 4 people holding me and looked down a field at a woman on a cradle at the head of the first line, running the rotation that was going to finish it. And I did not know her. I knew her name, her trade, her injury, her hours, and that I had done it for her. I had all of that off the record. I have no idea what she is like. The crews came off the load in rotation from the 16th hour. Haldervane's people worked the changeovers, and 5 of them are in cradles now who were not that morning. Margit Sol's number was 211. The finished figure was 194, and she has said in public that 17 is not an achievement, it is a rounding. The acceptances started registering again at the 17th hour, and they came fast, 11,000 of them inside 3 hours. Kettle fired the closing face at the 19th hour with the mass 140 yards inside the bowl, and it fell as a wall and not a slope, exactly as drawn in July. Jen Marrow opened the Broken Mile Gate 4 minutes later on a watch, and 100,000 tons of canal came down the old fell bed into the ladle, 9 hours to fill. The index confirmed at the 20th hour, while the water was still going in. Sufficient. That was all of it. On every window in the kingdom at once. Cephalon was on the anchor. The rotation had taken every crew off the load and put them back, and there is one position on that field that cannot be rotated. The entry took effect on every party who had accepted it in the same second, and from that second, every acceptor in that field had a body that could be beyond keeping. Hers was. She was under 1100 weight of running load on a cable head and had been for 10 hours. She held it. That is what matters. The confirmation landed, and she held that head for 4 minutes more, and 400 men came off the north shelf underneath her in those 4 minutes, and every one of them walked. She is the first person in Cairnvered to end in a year and 1 day. There is a stone on the ladle rim with her name on it, the only stone up there, and the crews cut it themselves. Prior Odd Kane accepted last, at the 22nd hour, in the dark, at the foot of the field, and he asked Osk to be his certifier. He got the thing he had spent a year on. He did not write it, and he knows it. He has said in public since that he was wrong about the method and right about the rest, and he is. The count went to 0 at about the 4th hour of the following morning. Nobody cheered. It went quiet in patches, the way a field goes quiet when the word is moving through it slowly. And then people sat down where they were standing. The thing is in the ladle under 111 feet of water and a rubble wall. It is not dead and never will be. It is placed, and there are 12 men on it in shifts, and always will be. Now the last thing, and it happened at the 3rd hour of that morning, before any of it, and I have it on a slate in my own hand because I knew what I was going to be asked to spend. She sent for me. I went out to the first line before it was light, and she had them prop her up, and she said, "Ask me." I said, "I do not remember the collapse." She said, "I know." I said, "I do not remember you before it." She said, "I know that too. You told me in August, and I have been waiting 4 weeks for you to ask me the actual question." I said, "Why did I do it?" She said, "You are going to want it to be something." It was not. There is nothing clever in it and nothing large, and I have had a year to make it into something, and I am not going to. She said, "You were 19, and I was under a slab, and you had done the arithmetic and told me 9 minutes because I made you. Then you stood there with 4 seconds and a button, and you could not do it." She said, "You could not stand there and let it be 9 minutes. That is the whole of it. Everything since has been you finding out what it costs to be a person who cannot stand there, and I would rather you were that than the other thing." Then she said, "Write it down now, because you are going to lose this before tonight, and I will not be here to say it twice." So I wrote it on a slate, and I have it, and I read it about once a week. I have to take her word for it. That is not a complaint. 400,000 people in that field took somebody's word for something that day, and every single one of them was asked first.
A man decided on his own what one person could carry in 4 seconds, and a country spent a year finding out what that costs. Then a clerk read a warrant all the way to the end. A drover chose her own road. A girl in a cradle asked for something small and got everybody the rules. A physician refused to certify what she was told to certify. A soldier asked one question in a room where he had no rank left. And a woman who had been decided for all year put her own mark on the page first, in front of a whole country, because nobody was going to do it for her. That is what it was about. If you want more like this, subscribe.